Welcome to Mystara for the first of the module remasters, with the adventure that started Mystara. Isla de la Muerte, or for those who don't speak Norwegian, the Isle of Dread, the one that everybody keeps trying to steal and make theirs. Last time I checked Elminster, Isle of Dread didn't introduce us to Forgotten Realms on page 3. That's where you find the mention of all the major nations of the known world, except Alphatia. Sure, it's only a paragraph each, but those descriptions gave us a taste of what will become the known world in a few years. You get the entire map on pages 16 and 17, but almost every setting has tried to lay claim to the adventure, starting with Greyhawk. Then the Forgotten Realms grabbed it with D&D Online. 4th edition put it in the Feywild. 5th edition put it in the elemental plane of water. We know where it is. We know where it's always been. I'm Mr. Welch. Grab your ditty bag. We're going to Tangaroa. The Isle of Dread was written in 1981 by Zeb Cook and Tom Moldvay, two of the greatest adventure designers ever to work on the hobby. It will be quicker to list the modules they created that were merely average than legendary. You're not going to find a bad book between them. Jeff D. did the original cover. In 1983, the book was revised, going from a blue cover to an orange cover, with a few differences in monsters, a mapping error corrected, but mostly just reformatted to fit in the standard module style that TSR had set for future projects. It was the module that was included in the Expert box set, and because of that, it's the second most published module by TSR, only behind Keep on the Borderlands. It's only 32 pages long with some handouts included, but the module's scope was far beyond anything TSR had published beforehand. This was the first sandbox module. Unlike the modules that came before it, the plot of this adventure is non-existent. You find a letter written by someone who claims to find this lost island with untold riches. The beginning is pretty much stolen from Treasure Island, with Rory Barbarossa replacing Billy Bones. The characters must find a ship that can follow this map, and then it's all up to them. It's 99% wilderness exploration. The Isle of Dread is the hex crawl. They say it's for levels 4 to 14, but the adventure they find on the island is the adventure they want to have. There's no great evil waiting for them. There's no soul-stealing lost artifact, no evil deity locked away. It's a sparsely populated, unexplored tropical island with dinosaurs. Knock yourself out. Be warned, any resemblance to Skull Island is purely intentional, so watch out for giant apes. Isle of Dread is considered one of the best hex crawls written for D&D, if not the best. It finds a perfect balance between lots of stuff to explore and lots of stuff to do. Later sandboxes gave you lots of open space to explore, but put all the world building on the DM. Other sandboxes filled in all the blanks. The DM tells the players what they hit when they reach a specific hex. Sure, Isle of Dread gave you lots of stuff to find, from friendly villages to hostile villages, lost temples, pirate havens, new races, and a few extra dungeons, but they're spread out all over the island. Players can walk for miles before they hit a scripted event, giving the DM all the time in the world to customize the island to fit the players. When the players start on the Isle of Dread, they got to decide what they intend to do there. The module gives a few ideas, like trading with the natives or exploring for mineral wealth, but you can do anything with the module. You can try to build your own settlement, take over existing settlements, though I suggest the evil guy's already there. You can try to round up dinosaurs and drag them back to the mainland. Map the entire island and sell the information to Minrathad. Get paid in advance if you do that. Yes, you can search for dungeons and similar in the adventure, but they're not the focus. You have the entire island open to you, and you have to bring the adventure to it. It will introduce the characters to the exploration side of D&D, and it will not be forgiven unless the DM decides to play nice. My suggestion, hire a guide. Actually, hire a lot of guides. The place is enormous, so are the dinosaurs. The module is mostly exploration, as you can imagine, and it hammers home that point by introducing quite a few races that the players will probably never have heard of. It debuts the Mystaran staples, the Rakasta, Xanathons, and Aranea. Yes, they get expanded in other books and borged into different settings, but this is where you first meet them. And they aren't the civilized version you meet in later books. They are all tribal, and they represent the 3 alignments of BEMCI. The cute and furry Xanathons are lawful. The nomadic and aloof Rakasta are neutral, and the xenophobic and treacherous Aranea are chaotic. You also meet the loathsome Kopru, and 9 new dinosaurs or megafauna for the first time. When it comes to recreating Jurassic Park, Tomb of Annihilation ain't got nothing on Isle of Dread. Nothing's stopping the players from turning this simple adventure into a full-blown campaign. It says levels 4 to 14, but if they hang around for 5 levels and hit name level, then it's time to start a domain, and there's no reason they can't build it on the island. Not like they're going to have to displace the native Tangaroans. Those guys just occupy a few small villages to the south. Some villages are hostile to the party, but they're hostile to everybody. These specifically are the pirates and the headhunters. Apart from a small peninsula on the southeast of the island, the rest of the Isle of Dread's up for grabs. If you want to start mining for gold, you're going to have to start shipping in miners from the mainland. Even if the party tries to hire the natives to mine the gold, or worse, force them to mine the gold, there's not enough of them to make the mining operation feasible. Plus, they don't have any knowledge of mining techniques. They're Stone Age fishermen. There's a lot of threats on the Isle of Dread, You don't earn the moniker of Dread if it's a cakewalk. The party is going into this adventure blind. All they get is the opening letter from Barbarossa, and that's it. The DM hands them a map of the island, and that's just the first hex right off the beach mapped out. The rest is left blank for the players to explore. If they want to land at the Tanaroan villages to meet and greet the locals, good for them. Probably less likely to get eaten by a T-Rex that way. But they don't have to do this. They can start the adventure anywhere they can land a boat. They can take on the pirates or even try to negotiate with them if they feel brave. If they feel really brave, they can try to carve a path straight to the central plateau. Though they're probably going to regret that. There's a lot of high-powered creatures waiting for the characters on this island, around the island, or above the island. The party can get a glimpse of the dragon and realize they need to level up a lot more before going further inland. From the top of the Tanaroan's gigantic wall, they can see the herds of dinosaurs that made this module famous. The party could decide to stick to the plains and avoid the more prominent and obvious threats. Or they can just carve through the jungles, climb the mountains, and trudge through the swamps, if they think that's where all the adventure's going to be. As the party levels up, the monsters get tougher, especially for the characters trying to challenge themselves by playing Dinosaur Wrangler. Nothing stopping this module from becoming a frequent location for the party's adventures. They can fill up their first tiny ship with various monsters or treasures, buy a bigger boat, and come back for a larger bite at the apple. Nothing stopping them. The island has all the necessary mineral resources if they want to build their own domain. Of course, other adventurers and explorers will try to find this new land of riches. They might return after several successful expeditions and discover a Phaeacian or Minrathadian fort waiting for them as the island has been officially claimed. Then they can help the natives fight off the invaders or organize them into a formal government and deal with the Phaeacians as a unified people, and hope the Phaeacians aren't there to just strip mine the island. But then you can have that one legionnaire fall in love with a native, betray his people, and get them slaughtered by conspiring with the islanders, despite the fact the colonizers will return in more significant numbers with more troops, just like in the movie Fern Gully 2, Scorched Earth Day. For those who follow the three-pillar system, this module is mostly exploration. Move into a new hex, see what's there, map it out, repeat the process. If they explore the entire island, it will take months or even years in game time to check every hex individually. There are plenty of opportunities for combat and diplomacy on the island, but you're going to have to look for those chances. The Xanathons and Rakasta are open to trade and diplomacy, not so much the Aranea. You can even make friends with the natives that live on the plateau once you get the Kopru out of the way. If you want to fight, there are as many dinosaurs as the DM wants to throw at you, plus any number of regular monsters. And for a sense of scale, the Isle of Dread is about the same size as the main island in Irendi. If you want to follow the far superior 5-pillar system, you can shape this world as much as you want, because Isle of Dread is tabula rasa. You can carve out a chunk and name yourself king if that's your character's goal. Turn the entire island into a fantasy Burning Man, where it's barter only, anything goes, and clothing is very much optional. Not the current corporatized Burning Man, where you have tech millionaires bringing their yachts on wheels and jacking up the prices of everything, ultimately defeating the original concept. I'm talking about inviting a bunch of slackers and weirdos where you can live like a king because you had the foresight to bring a trunk full of Wall Street journals and use them as currency, and people were giving you anything and everything for a single section of that newspaper that they then used for clothing, bedding, pillows, toilet paper, reading material if necessary, a hat, a brooch, a pterodactyl, or anything else to get the sun off you. Sure, you run the chance of your then-girlfriend running off with half the newspaper to trade for alcohol and other more questionable substances, and spending the entire event with her new friends abandoning you because you're too square, so you spend all of Burning Man talking to the amazing naked Asian poet who's totally digging you, but no, you have to stay monogamous, despite your supposed girlfriend clearly not sharing the same beliefs. But at least you had all those copies of the Wall Street Journal to trade for food from the emergency personnel on the scene, because the moron who was supplying all the food decided only to bring tuna, but didn't bother to properly maintain his food truck, so all the tuna went ambient temperature in the middle of the Nevada desert. But I'm not bitter. Where was I? Oh yeah, if you wanted to turn the island into a representative republic, go for it. The Isle of Dread is a timeless module. There's a reason why all the other settings keep trying to steal it for their own. When you boil it down to its basics, it's just a tropical island with some monsters. It's not magical, there's nothing really mysterious about it. It doesn't hold any world-shaping conspiracies, unless the DM wants to put them there. The lost civilization is in the middle of a single village. All the rest are on the coastline where you'd expect them. Goodman Games picked up the module for their second 5e conversion, though they expanded on it and fixed a glaring naming issue. The Elk Clan has been renamed due to the fact that the elk's temperate, and this is a tropical zone, and I'm entirely too lazy to do the research to finish that joke. Needless to say, a 700-pound elk is not swimming 1,800 miles from Osland to the Isle of Dread. If you want to get the module, it's only been reprinted a ridiculous number of times. Remember, this module was number 2 in the list of printed adventures. You can get a decent original copy on eBay or similar sites for less than $10. Goodman Games has the 5e version for $50, complete with both blue and orange covers reprinted. You can get that at your friendly local game store, no problem. You can also get the PDF from DM's Guild for $5, but don't be cheap and just buy the printed copy. Les bons artistes important, les grands artistes volent. Or for the people not from Lafayette, Louisiana, good artists borrow, great artists steal. That's the core philosophy behind today's remaster, the timeless module X2 Castle Amber. Okay, nobody calls it Castle Amber, but it's best known by its subtitle, Chateau de Amberville, and it's been called the sister module to Ravenloft. It's also recognized as the more difficult of the two to DM. I'm not going to sugarcoat this either. This is a great adventure, but if you're running it, you got to put a lot of homework into it. This ain't a beginner module. Welcome to Mystara. I'm Mr. Welch, and it's time to let all y'all eat cake. Alright, getting the history bits out of the way first. Castle Amber was written in 1981 by Tom Moldvay, with Errol Otis doing the cover. Interior artists include Otis, as well as Holloway, Roslov, Harry Quinn, and Stephen Sullivan, and this is some of the most iconic early art for the BEMCI line. The module was inspired heavily by the works of Ashton Clark Smith, the third member of the Weird Fantasy Triumvirate, along with Lovecraft and Howard. Smith was the only one of those three that did not die young. I made a video about his influence, and I'll link that at the end. The module is partially set in Smith's short story, A Rendezvous in Aveyron, going all the way back to 1931. It's not directly taken from the story, but TSR freely admits the link. Castle Amber and Ravenloft are brought up in the same sentence because they have a lot in common, but they also deviate in tone once the adventures start. Ravenloft hit 2 years after Castle Amber and shares a lot of themes with it. Poison mist traps the party, there's a sizable, creepy building to explore, and you've got to sort out a mystery to get home. The main difference is where Ravenloft has the party being hunted by a more powerful monster. In Castle Amber, they deal with the insane aftermath of a high-powered and buku dysfunctional family. The adventure is pure gothic horror. It's not that you're just trapped in this chateau out of time, it's that nothing makes sense. The more you explore, the less you understand. There's a powerful sense of wrongness in Castle Amber. The few survivors are well past the bend. They obsess over a single event and try to draw the party into their obsession. If the party ignores them, the NPC is more than happy to not even notice them. The party is in grave danger, but not from combat. There's a few fights, but they aren't going to challenge a party of that level very much. But the chateau will try to drive them insane, curse them, possess them, and do anything else to make the characters unsure who they can trust. In Ravenloft, the greatest threat to the party is Strahd. In Castle Amber, the greatest threat to the party is the party. The chateau doesn't rise to the level of genus loci, but the party doesn't know that, and their paranoia is what makes this adventure a classic. Gothic horror is bloody challenging to pull off in an adventure because it's all about the sensation. You're going to be talking a lot in this module if you're the DM. There's odd noises, unidentifiable smells, and shadows rearranging themselves in your peripheral vision. If you're the DM, you have to explain this constantly. Perception checks are useless in Castle Amber because many of these events will be in the party's imagination. Not the player's imagination, but their character is seeing things. The chateau is off. You need to throw in subtle clues that something is very wrong in each room. There's a garden in the middle of the chateau that has no business being there. When they try to map it, it doesn't fit on the map. From the outside, the garden should be 100 feet across. When they walk through it, it's twice that size with no explanation. Other tricks can be that the rooms feel slanted when you stand in them, but they're perfectly flat if tested. Paintings shift if you look at them a second time. And of course, random noises that only turn out to be real about half the time. There's the problem. This module isn't precisely evocative with some of the box text. It says things like, you walk in and there's 8 dog-headed humanoids in the room. You have to go back to another section that explains who these dog-headed humanoids are and how they would react. The module requires a lot of setup to run correctly. It doesn't help that the D'Amberville family is notoriously massive, meaning you have to keep track of more NPCs than most other adventures. You will need to keep a record of who is in this adventure and what they want, then make notes of the different rooms and how to mess with the party's head as they adventure. Here's a suggestion. Buy a thesaurus. You'll need one to run Castle Amber to maximum effect. But what's the plot of the module? The premise is simple. There's a curse on the D'Amberville family when one of their number murdered the head of the household. Bad magical juju happened, and now the chateau is trapped in time, and everyone is trapped inside it. The mists pull the party in so they can lift the curse and free everyone. It sounds a lot like Ravenloft, but there's one significant difference. Unlike Ravenloft with Strahd, the big bad of Castle Amber is dead. Not like an undead stalking the party dead. I'm talking skeleton-shaped charcoal briquette dead. The party must figure out what he did from the clues he left, and somehow undo the murder so the chateau can free everybody. Mucking up their efforts are the remnants of the D'Amberville family, which, without exception, are cursed and or evil. Because they figuring out who's trying to kill you, villains, and the ones trying to kill you just because they've had their brains scrambled, isn't going to be easy. Then we come to the most frustrating, rewarding, and messed up part of the adventure that people always bring up. This module has several sections that are sadistic games of press your luck. You get presented with numerous opportunities to get some serious buffs for your character. The problem is that it requires a test, usually a saving throw, and if you pass, you get all sorts of nice stuff. You can get permanent stat increases. You might never have to eat again. But on the flip side, you could be cursed to have to eat twice as much. The more chances you take, the better your character can become. But if you fail the tests, get ready to make a new character. Castle Amber gives. Castle Amber drags you screaming into the spirit realm, never to be seen again. It's all up to the players. They don't have to take these tests. They can avoid the risk by not indulging in the contests. They don't have to eat that sumptuous meal. They don't have to sleep in that bed. They don't have to pick a card. But the minute somebody tastes the soup and permanently gains hit points, everybody else will probably jump at the chance. It's their fault if they go too far, and it costs them. Just because the fighter got asked what his favorite color is for his test, doesn't mean the next test isn't what the capital of Assyria is. That's one of the most frustrating parts of the module. It gives the players all the rope they want, and then they get upset when they hang themselves with it. Worse for the party is the module is entirely random sometimes with what they need to do to pass a test. Sometimes failing the test is what you have to do to get the bonus. They can try to avoid what appears to be an obvious trap, but the ones that fail find themselves given a random bonus later in the adventure. You have to play up the weirdness. If you get greedy and steal all the golden acorns from the squirrel, get ready to defend yourself from the wild hunt randomly showing up to take those acorns back. It helps keep the party ill at ease. When random bad things seem to happen to you, you start second-guessing every decision. Then again, when random good stuff happens to the party, they can also become reckless. Castle Amber encourages both in equal measure. I've said this adventure is for more experienced DMs, but it's also for more experienced players. Experience might not be the correct term. How about mature players? Bad things will happen to the players, many of them lethal. But for awful non-lethal stuff, the characters can be possessed, cursed, go insane, polymorphed, go berserk, or get turned into a werewolf, and not the good kind of werewolf. That's where you're going to run into trouble, because younger players have a bad habit of throwing out player agency, because they don't like their characters being forced to do something the player doesn't want them to do. Okay, so do a lot of older players. But that's a significant part of this module. You need players who will accept that things are going to happen to their characters they don't want, and just roll with it. Castle Amber is a bit of a mirror compared to Ravenloft. In that one, you head to the village before you have to take on the big scary castle. Castle Amber puts you in the big scary castle where you have to figure out how to get to the village. The back end of the module is a scavenger hunt, but first you have to find out what's on the list. Once you've found the list, then you have to find the keys, so it's a scavenger hunt to start another scavenger hunt. It is scavenger hunt inception in Chateau de Ambaville. Once you've got the keys, then you start the end game. The party finds itself in France. Not a fantasy stand-in for France, French France. Yes, it has magic and monsters, but they speak actual French. Paris is the capital. One of the Louis is the king. That France. You're stuck in a small village, so you don't have to worry about mapping out Versailles, but it's still in the game somewhere. Here, you get to mess with the party because little things they take for granted don't work here. The villagers don't speak common. They speak French. I hope somebody in the party knows the right spell, because nobody in this town will know how to speak the common tongue of another plane of existence. If you want to fudge it, one of the wizards here can know the spell, but let the players sweat for a while. Then the party has to find all the items, preferably in order, because the MacGuffin slaying sword is the first on the list, and the MacGuffin needing slaying is right around the corner. That big giant on the cover is beyond nasty, well out of the league of the players at this level, and they still have to fight it. It's part of the scavenger hunt. But at least the module gives them hope. This part of the adventure is not the time to go sandboxing around with a 100-foot-tall undead giant with a love of trust falls roaming around looking for them. The two ways to kill the giant are equally dangerous, and you can try both. But don't hold back. This part is meant to be dangerous. Then they have to fight another big bad for the following item on the list, and the module screws them over when they win. Because, of course it does. Then the party gets to the finish line, uses all the scavenger hunt items, and watches as all the really cool overpowered things that they just collected shatter. But at least the adventure is over. Castle Amber is a challenging adventure that's advertised for levels 3 to 6. Some of the monsters are the nastiest D&D has to offer. The module gives you quite a few Mystaran monsters for the first time, like the Lupin, Magan, Ostigos, and Brain Collectors, to name a few. The module wants to screw with the players, but not just from brutal fights. The puzzles are tricky. There's a lot of red herrings everywhere. The party is going to get ambushed by a lot of nasty stuff. Unlike Tomb of Horrors, it's not trying to kill them unfairly, but to keep them off kilter. They don't know if the next room is going to be empty, illusionary, occupied by an insane ogre maid, or have a vast creature that shouldn't even physically fit through the door pounce on them. Nothing makes sense. Nothing seems real. That's the beauty of the module, and one of the reasons why it's so bloody hard to run. If you're a new DM, get a few expert-level modules under your belt, then come back to run this one. There are no training wheels in Chateau d'Amberville. If you want to get a copy of it, you've got a lot of choices. You can get an original online for about $20. The advantage with this is you get the map that you can use as a DM screen, something newer modules sadly miss. The PDF is $5 on DriveThru RPG, the print on demand is $11. Goodman Games has remastered it with their classic line for $50, which adds a lot more to it, especially in the French villages. And it's also got a fold-out map that flips out a page of text for some reason, so the players can read it, which is an odd design choice. Goodman, please never do that again. That wraps up Chateau d'Amberville. I highly suggest using the French terms presented because it gives the module a unique feel, and no Mystara player calls Etienne d'Amberville Stephen Amber anyways. Welcome to Mystara for the latest remaster, Curse of Xanathon. This adventure doesn't get much attention because of its location in the release schedule. It's Module X3, meaning it's sandwiched by other adventures that are considered legendary to this day. It's the Mark Koenig of Mystara modules, and much like the shortstop of the 27 Yankees, it doesn't get the respect or recognition of the Babe Ruth Isle of Dread, Lou Gehrig Castle Amber, or Earl Combs Desert Nomad series. Time to give some love to the utility infielder of the Expert series. I'm Mr. Welch, and root for the home team. Curse of Xanathon was written in '82 by Douglas Niles, who has been on this channel many times. Timothy Truman gets all the credit for the art, both cover and interior, though there's an impressive and uncredited Jim Holloway full-color piece on page 22. There's no mistaking a Jim Holloway piece. The module is a standard 32 pages with 2 fold-out covers. It's for character levels 5 to 7, and you can jump right into it after Isle of Dread or Castle Amber. To get the pricing out of the way early, it's available for PDF on the Guild, but you can find a played copy online for about $20. There's not much of a demand for it. I don't think it's been given the full POD treatment, but just be careful because I know the Guild has offered some books for POD and pulled them off the market for some reason. Fair warning, this is a video for DMs looking to run the adventure with lots of tips from my experience. Players might want to stay away. The adventure predates the Northern Reaches, so the town of Runa has a distinctive not-Viking feel. Duke Stephen has been acting very strange, not all like a Vestlandic noble in fact. You could substitute any generic ruler for the Mad Duke and nobody would notice. If you want to make this more in line with the official Vestland, make the town more Nordic aesthetically. There's a few other glaring problems, like the threat of the Ethengars. They were officially Mongols in all but name. In addition, the bad guy immortal is Krishia, the patron of mischief. But he's not evil. He's certainly not the type to start wars. In this case, the guy posing as him is an entropic immortal. When the party solves the adventure, they expose the true identity of the false Krishia, and it's probably going to be Loki. Who else is it going to be? Let's not kid ourselves. There will be consequences behind the scenes in Pandius. Impersonation of another immortal to their followers is a huge rules violation. But Loki. When the Gazetteers were later written, it was obvious that Vestland was not a target for Ethengar because of the horse-resistant rough terrain. Make the pending invasion of Ethengar just a large mercenary or bandit group if you want. Unlike other modules that predate the Gazetteers, this one is an easy fix. The adventure starts with the party arriving in Runa and learning all about the strange laws the Duke has been handing out. Like, all taxes must be paid in beer. Actually, if you're going with the Gazetteer adjustments, that one doesn't sound out of place for a Viking land. Horses must be ridden backwards, nothing may be burned after dark, dwarves are now illegal, and the Duchy of Runi has declared war on Rockholm. That last one is a bit concerning, to put it mildly. The party will notice a large number of taverns in the border town, 20 to be precise, numbered 1 to 20 on the chart, but none standing out apart from each other in detail. The party will also notice the Temple of the Spuming Nuga. Then the snickering will start, and not stop because it sounds dirty. It did then. It does now. Say it with me. Spuming Nuga. It's another form for the immortal Proteus, who does not actually appear in this adventure. And for the DMs running this adventure, spuming means blowing water out of a blowhole. And Nuga was an archaic term for baleen whales. So a spuming Nuga is a whale exhaling water out of its blowhole. Now tell your players to stop snickering. Blowhole. This is where the module takes shape, as it's a triple threat module. Much of it spent running around Runa, piecing together the mystery of why the normal, sane, and open-minded Duke has apparently gone gaga. The module has a city element, a hex crawl element, and finally you go on several dungeon crawls. It's one of the few modules that pulled off this transition from one location to another, and one of the ones that does it well for just a few pages. There's a helpful beggar that knows more than he lets on, But you can leave him out because some parties will torture him for information if he gives one too many clues. Knowing everything in a mystery makes you a suspect. Depending on the party composition, the module might need a bit of tweaking because, unlike other adventures, character backgrounds come into play big time in Xanathon. Dwarves are marching to attack the city, putting any dwarf characters on the spot. The Ethengar is supposed to be the big bad, meaning a character from that nation will also become an immediate suspect. Then again, the Ethengarian would be the first one to notice that the Temple of Krishia is not what it seems. Go with those details. Players will love it when their background has an unexpected passive benefit. The horse warrior that goes to pay his respect at the temple will know more about the religion than the actual priest. Warning bells would be going off instantly. It would be like a Southern Baptist attending the Sunday potluck and noticing a complete lack of green bean casserole. Minor details like that would be highly suspicious to someone from that upbringing. The first part of the adventure involves the party getting all the rumors, finding out who the power players in the town are, and attempting to get to the Duke to see if he's actually making all the bizarre proclamations. While they're arriving in town and getting their bearings, the declaration of war will be announced. This kicks off the adventure because, in the game, it makes no sense to anyone. First, one town will not declare war against an entire country. San Antonio is not going to declare war on Luxembourg and have anyone take them seriously, though I put my money on San Antonio with that one. The town has good standings with the dwarves. There's no lingering racial strife at all. The random announcement confuses the townfolk more than stirs them into action. Many blame the new law on the captain of the guard, Draco Storm Sailor. DMing tip, change that guy's name. Is there an adventure, book, or show where a guy with the first name Draco was the good guy? You tell everybody that the advisor to the king is named Draco Storm Sailor. He's obviously the villain. Now, if his name is Jan Johansson, nowhere near as suspicious. The party might even schedule an appointment with his secretary instead of breaking into the barracks. Then the game turns into a dungeon crawl, where the party has to sneak through the barracks to find incriminating evidence against Sir Evil McNaughtybad to kick off the quest part of the adventure. This can be a bother for party members, as the Ducal Guard can be loyal to the Duke. His weird new laws might confuse them, but they are sworn to uphold them. There's many role-playing opportunities here for players to convince guards to help them, point them in the right direction, or ignore them so the Duke can be cured. They will find the incriminating evidence they seek, but no Evil McNaughtybad, but they have the next clue. This part might be difficult for party members because they must find the note, but they still have to go on the rest of the adventure. Even if they expose the bad guy, his troops might be loyal to him. Or even if they hold down Sir Evil McNaughtybad, they still can't cure the Duke. That requires the second quest part. Since there is a very large angry dwarf army rapidly approaching at their slow, methodical dwarven pace, no one can be spared from the town guard. It's up to the party. There's no escaping destiny. The party now has a name for the guy who's behind it all. So they get to skip over to the Temple of Krishia to confront the High Priest. Well, the party already knows he's the bad guy. His name is literally on the name of the module that's facing them. But they get to do more dungeon crawling in a city-based module. Here's where you need to adjust more to make this module like the Gazetteers. Again, it's just simple substitutions to increase player immersion. The magic user goes from being a run-of-the-mill wizard to a Hakaman. Use the rules out of Ethengar for that class, it's easy. This part also follows one of my bits of advice for exploration, as everything is written in Ethengarian. None of their scrolls, books, or messages are in common. If the party can't speak that language, they're going to need magic or a translator. But if one of the party is Ethengarian, that character will save you a lot of spells. The party then goes sneaking around, finds the big bad, and more importantly, the big bad's impervious plot armor. They can't hurt him. They can't even wound him. The party will lose this encounter. It's not one they can win. And it's evident from the start they need to be anywhere but there. If you have stubborn players, this module will end right there, and not in a good way. You will need to stress, in no uncertain terms, they need to gallantly chicken out, bravely take to their feet, and beat a very brave retreat. Then we come to the exploration part of the adventure. Before the characters get out of town, the Duke has declared another law, requiring all horses to be fed meat only. Even if the party can reach the Duke, no spells can cure his madness. If you want to save the Duke, you have to figure out how to hurt Xanathon. And I don't mean by setting him up on a blind date, getting his hopes up really high, and then dumping him the next day. That move might leave him naked in the shower, bawling his eyes out while eating Oreos, but he's still going to be invulnerable to damage. No, they've got to get to the Shrine of Krishia to remove that protection up in the mountains. And that means one thing. There's going to be rock climbing. There's not much to the hex crawl portion of the adventure. It's relatively short, but there's lots of time for adventure hooks. It takes 5 days, and it's up a mountain. Break out the rules for survival. Burn some supplies while they scale cliffs, and of course, there's many combat chances. Sadly, there's no Manticore fight, despite the fantastic art from Jim Holloway. Screw that. On day 3, have the Manticore attack. You don't waste an awesome full-page art from a master like Jim Holloway by not giving the party the experience of that fight. Then 5 days later, the party reaches the Shrine of Cretia. Well, they hit a fork in the road. Go one way and they get the fight on the cover of the module with the Chimera. Go the other way, they find the temple. DMs, you might be inclined to just make this a Morton's fork so they fight the Chimera either way, because it's got some sweet loot that the players will definitely want. But if they flip the wrong side of the coin when they choose which path they take, they just miss out on the entire encounter. Just because a module gives you a choice, you don't have to offer it. It's a decent encounter against a memorable and iconic monster, and players will remember the combat. Now back to dungeon crawling. Unlike the sneaky parts back in Runa, this is a room-by-room cave cleaning. Again, give the clerics and wizards an Ethangarian vibe. You can even throw in a spirit shaman instead of just one of the clerics. Give the bad guys a unique flavor. It's better for the players. Unlike the temples and the barracks back in Runa, there's no sneaking in this place. Everybody will attack you on sight. There's a lot of monsters here ripe for stabbing. There's a lot of no-save traps, but nothing immediately lethal. This adventure wasn't written by Gary, after all. The party kills its way to the MacGuffin, and they get to meet the one new monster introduced in the adventure, the Hypno-Snake. All glory to the Hypno-Snake. Yeah, that's somebody's fetish. But the party has the MacGuffin, and it's back to Runa to stop the surprise villain, who's not a surprise to anyone because his name is literally on the title of the adventure. Also Sir Evil McNaughtybad. And the ending is kind of anticlimactic. Xanathon realizes the jig is up and coughs up the cure, even if halfway pressured. By that, he knows when the MacGuffin is brought even remotely near to him, his invulnerability disappears. He's got substantial defenses and is in the back of the temple to Cretia, but if the party convinces him they've got his kryptonite, he folds like a 2-7 offsuit hand in poker. There's no fight. He just tosses it to him out of the window and tells them to go away, then flees. He scarpers off to be a future villain, but the party can sate their bloodlust by fighting their way through treasonous guards. And then Sir Evil McNaughtybad. But if they've already done all that, then they can go straight to the Duke and remove his curse. The end. There is a plot hole to this module that you might have noticed, as Xanathon wants the Loyalists and traitors to fight to the death, and then his mercenaries arrive and take over. That still leaves a pissed-off Dwarven army marching to force an explanation out of the Duke. If they find a conquering Ethangarian army instead, they would know immediately what happened, and would be rather put out at being used as pawns. Then they would beat the duplicitous occupiers until Candy comes out. My players pointed that out the first time we ran through it, and it's always stuck with me. That's Curse of Xanathon. It's an above-average module with many different adventuring styles included. It's part hex crawl, part dungeon crawl, part city dive, and tons of mystery elements thrown in. It's not as famous as the 4 modules on either side of it, but that means your players won't be as familiar with it. Welcome to Mystara for another remaster. This one going for a twofer, as Master of the Desert Nomads and the Temple of Death are up, modules X4 and X5. Despite being standalone, Module X4 was the explicit setup for Temple of Death, and it made little sense if you played it as a standalone. The pair are universally considered a single edition and will be treated as such here. They are also one of the best adventures TSR created. Ranking number 8 on the best Mystara modules is done by yours truly. I'm Mr. Welch, and it's time to ask, who's the master? Both modules were written in 1983, predating the Gazetteer line by several years. The legendary Zeb Cook authored both, with Keith Parkinson and Jeff Easley doing the art for Master, and Timothy Truman handling all the art for Temple. The adventurers gave Mystara some of its most iconic monsters for the first time, with the Boot, Nagpa, Soul Eater, Juggernaut, and Tabby appearing in Master, and Dusano, Geonid, Malfera, Mugina, and the Spectral Hound debuting in Temple. That's 10 monsters in just one adventure. Master takes you through the nation of Sind, though this version has none of the Indian allegories for which the country would later be known. Hul has a robust Persian vibe, and they did focus on that aspect later in different source books. The adventures are wilderness-focused, but Master far more than Temple. They aren't hex crawls either. If you go so far along the route, you will find the significant adventure points no matter what. No taking a wrong turn and missing out on the adventure. The action will come to you, no matter which way you head, as long as it's vaguely in the right direction. The party is hired by Darrican to find a lost patrol in Sind, meaning you'll need a party for the reason to be there. Master starts at level 6, recommended, so you are established adventurers by this point. There is an official retcon of the starting village of Pramayana in Champions of Mystara to reflect that it's in a fertile plain rather than a desert. In addition, the Great Waste does not include the nation of Sind, but it's found on the nation's western border. These changes are noticed and corrected in later products, so that's a plus. As I stated, the first module was the more wilderness-related of the two. Temple has a brief section on getting to Hul, and then you're right into the meat of the module, which is obviously a dungeon crawl. The encounters you're going to hit along the way are some of the best D&D ever had to offer, and even hinted at a few locations that would become part of Mystaran lore later. The Demiplane of Nightmares is first introduced here, including 2 nightmare monsters. The Dimensional Vortex gets its first appearance, and that was later expanded in the Immortal series, though not in great detail. Lastly, this is the first reference to the invisible moon of Miyashima, as the party can get sidetracked and vacuumed up to visit the land of Samurai Jungle Space Cats. The moon isn't named, it's just a reference to the Moon Kingdom. This reference then boomerangs back in Voyage of the Princess arc, where Prince Haldimor finds a Samurai Jungle Space Cats contingent in Sind. The modules were rather popular with the TSR authors, as you can tell, because they made a serious effort to make the details of their canon in the timeline. This wasn't entirely possible, as the sequel, Red Arrow Black Shield, was kicked to the far future because it made a mess of the setting. More on that in the next remaster. These modules were the first ones to expand the known world, first presented in the Isle of Dawn, and gave us one of the most iconic villains from Mystara, only rivaled possibly by Bargle. The Master would later return in Module X10, but it would also be a major power player in Mystara all the way through 2nd edition and into the Poor Wizard's Almanacs. The allure of the Desert Nomads series is how it opens up the new areas, and while it doesn't flood you with information, it gives you a glance at what lies just outside the world they know. It does this without turning the villains into a cartoon. Considering this was the 80s, that's admirable. It pushes the characters to make the right decisions based on the information they discover, then screws the players over with a clever plot twist few suspect. At the start of Master of the Desert Nomads, the players are hired by Darrican as part of a large mercenary army to find out what's with all the reports of a massive army in the Great Wastes, or what would later be defined as Sind. Only the party is recruited as reserves. The body of the main army marched weeks ago, and the party is sent out to find why the command lost contact. Cue the adventurers getting the actual quest from the guy they save from certain death, or he gives them the quest with his dying breath. The adventure is very much on a railroad, but as the entire goal of the mission is to get to the Temple of Death, it's hard not to be on a straight line. You don't have to make many changes to the module after Sin was retconned later, because the action picks up in the Great Salt Marsh, or Nimkin Yalaka as it was later renamed. The swamp is particularly dangerous because of the numerous ambushes and one of the nastiest encounters the party will ever face, which became the trademark of the series, the Malakaz. It's the spirit of an evil wizard who, after her death, managed to turn the area around her hut into a trap. She's not undead, but it's more like she's cursed the region with her dying breath. You will need a spellcaster with specific spells to escape this encounter, because the party can't leave without those spells. Every night the Malakaz tries to drain a creature of its ability to think, leaving those affected as vegetables. This encounter could end in a TPK if the party is ill-prepared or doesn't have a wizard or cleric. To avoid this, the DM may have to fudge. If they try to leave the area, all paths lead right back to the hut. Burn the hut down, and when you leave, you will now return to the now restored Malakaz's hut. You can get clues on how to escape the trap, but again you need the right spells. Fighters and thieves are useless here without DM fiat. You have a choice for the caravan and bandit encounters that make up a large portion of the central section of the adventure, as the module has a strong Arabic feel and Sind is based on India. Either keep with the Indian vibe and change up the encounters, or make them more Hoolian in nature and change them to a Persian theme. Either way, in the overall theme, this is purely cosmetic. If you want to upgrade the camels to 2 humps, that's on you. If you want, you get a grand battle with desert raiders against a caravan, but the players can hide and watch the caravan get slaughtered if they don't want to get involved. It's not very heroic, but it is an option. Then they have a quick jaunt to the hidden temple that's just a straight shot to the end. It doesn't even branch out to other directions, where you have to stop a Nagpa from destroying the map. The players are going to get frustrated with the Master, as he's always one step ahead of them, because he's cheating, but they can figure out how he's spying on them if they look hard enough. The party will face multiple groups in this module that are far too numerous to handle. They will need to use diplomacy, subterfuge, or stealth to avoid conflicts. Some of the groups are helpful, others serve the Master directly. This gives the characters plenty of roleplay opportunities because while they're at spirit level, even they can't take on 200 bandits if things go south. Alignment is central here because the dervishes they encounter will help them, but only if they're not evil. Then the party has to get around a large raiding party that can be rather informative if the characters play their cards right. Then the module concludes with an encounter that is going to make your players hate one particular D&D monster, as while they're expecting betrayal by anyone at this point, they are going to find their supposed benefactors quite tough, numerous, and worse, the party doesn't know which of the NPCs are monsters and which ones are telling the truth. You've got a party that has been immersed in paranoia at this point, having been spied on the entire time, and now they find a supposed ally that, of course, will be the most brutal fight so far. The players can spot the bad guys if they're suspicious, but not so suspicious that they don't see the actual friendly NPCs that can help them. Then right as the party is done with all the backstabbing, Master of the Desert Nomads ends. Time for Temple of Death. Temple of Death is recommended for levels 6 to 10, but there's a very strong suggestion that at least the Cleric and Fighter be on the higher end of that scale. It's still a linear game, as you're headed to a specific location, if the title didn't give that away. Go through the pass where the desert nomads left off, into the town of Magdon, through the Darkwood, and finally find the Temple of Death, which takes up half of the module. This adventure is notoriously lethal, even for a BEMCI product. Zeb Cook does not pull punches, and he does give hints to the DM about which path the players need to take to succeed. Stealth is optional, and not in the joking manner. The players are facing numerous foes that are powerful, and who will use divination magic to track them if they screw up. Balancing that out are some of the most memorable encounters ever put inside of a module. The party will learn quickly that this adventure plays for keeps. There's lots of illusions, trickery, and more save or die checks than new players will think possible. The first part of the adventure includes a cave disguised with hallucinatory terrain, an insidiously hostile beam of light, a mock dragon operated by ruffians, a mammoth airdrop, a hallucinatory fungal castle, a skybeam bridge leading to the Kingdom of the Moon, a rather reasonable cloud giant dormant at the end of the valley. And if you think this sounds like a wild ride, you would be correct. All of these happen in just the first section of the adventure. These encounters are why Temple of Death is considered a classic. Zeb Cook is a game writer without equal, and his prowess is on full display in just 3 pages. Once you've survived that gauntlet, you will finally reach Hool, or at least the borders of it. That's when the module goes from difficult to sadistic. Hool is run by a priesthood where paranoia is the most treasured attribute. Everyone is spying on everybody, and the party is no exception. They don't have to act strange to make the local leaders suspicious of them. It's their default status. The local population is cowed into obeying. You aren't going to find friends easily. You will have a difficult time if you aren't human and disguises are mandatory. Their chief method of finding traitors is mind probes and torture. There are two chief methods of finding traitors are mind probes and torture, and truth serums. There are three chief methods of finding traitors is mind probes, torture, truth serums, and torture. They really like torture. The players are going to have to use extreme caution to get the information they need without getting caught. Then the party gets to the temple after finding its actual location. The master sends a flying ship powered by skeletons as a special invitation. He's been tracking their actions, almost from the start of their quest, and wants to make them an offer, or destroy them utterly. He's not picky. He is possibly the greatest example in D&D of an evil diviner, and just how much of a pain they are. How do you sneak up on somebody who can follow your every move? While a flying ship with a skeleton crew is a great idea, it only goes to certain death, but the players won't know that. But if the players got this far in the adventure, you better believe they'll suspect it. The characters are in for a hell of a time when they get to the temple. Most of the villains are clerics, and more than a few diviners. Everyone is fanatically loyal to the master, and their only allies are prisoners whose goals are often just survival at all costs. The temple has multiple surprises, including a teleport trap that isn't quite a trap, but will still remove a character from the adventure if they aren't careful. It's not fatal, it's just they're too far away to further participate. This part can be frustrating beyond belief, as the master is one of the most formidable foes ever, and even when he dies, he has a bad habit of not staying dead. He is a high-level cleric whose backup plans have backup plans and all that. I'm not spoiling the end of Temple of Death because I want your players to get the same feeling of frustration my players did all those years ago. These modules are defined by their completely unique and memorable encounters. Monsters don't just jump out at you. First you have to go to some mind-boggling location and then get jumped by the monsters. The modules are brutal, deadly, and far superior to most modules written even today, especially today. The players can do everything right and still lose. Failure is often a learning experience. Hopefully you gain some understanding of what went wrong and avoid the same mistakes in your next venture. Other times, what you had in mind gets altered beyond your initial concept, and the idea gets lost somewhere in the editing process, leading to an adventure that doesn't know its purpose. That's the theme of today's remaster, X6 Quagmire by Merle Rasmussen. It was supposed to be the next Isle of Dread, but between the writing and the editing, the plot was reduced to bare bones, causing the module to be regarded as one of the worst in the BEMCI line. This is one of the 2 modules that were retconned out of existence with the release of Champions of Mystara. Still, there are some elements you can use in your adventure. Welcome to Mystara. I'm Mr. Welch, and no giggity. But before we get started, I have to return a favor. Some changes and improvements are coming to Welcome to Mystara, including the return of Mad Musings, and Patrick E. Pullen is helping me make the channel even better than it was previously. I know, like that's possible. But I will never stop striving for perfection. I intend to be more perfect than everyone else. To thank Patrick, I strongly recommend you check out his new anthology book, Dark World Legends of Lorna, on Kickstarter, featuring works from writers like Gene Rabe and Richard Knock of Dragonlance fame, among others. It's already fully funded, but he's added additional bonuses like his Dark World Adventure Terror at Mirkwell for Roll20, and a chance to play D&D with some of the authors. These include Richard Lee Byers and Donald Bingle of Forgotten Realms fame. The book is available in PDF, softback, hardback, and you can't go wrong if you're looking for a new read from some of D&D's veteran authors. Fair warning, the D&D game with the authors has limited space, so make sure you grab all the remaining seats to spite all the people who made fun of you for being a geek back in high school. But now being a geek is cool, and they're going to try to show that they were geeks all along, even though they couldn't tell a D8 from a D10 or even spell Catopolis when they were making fun of you at the lunch table. So grab the book and join the game, just to show all the people who picked on you all those years ago that doing your own homework and not paying other people to do it means you can afford luxuries like Kickstarter stretch goals. I mean, sure, all that homework money did pay for a lot of D&D back in the day, but we're adults now and we don't hold grudges anymore, right? So check out Dark World Legends of Lorna. The link is in the description. Where was I? Oh, that's right, Quagmire's technical details. Quagmire is the 6th expert module, written again by Merle Rasmussen in 1984. He is best known as the author of the Top Secret RPG, which was previously reviewed on this channel. Steve Peregrine did the cover art, and Jeffrey Butler got the credit for the interior art. It's a 32-page hex crawl for levels 4 through 10, but as you soon will see, the levels don't mean much because you can plug and play any number of monsters to adjust the difficulty. The module opened up the known world with the addition of the Serpent Peninsula, though the addition to canon would be replaced in the Champions of Mystara. Quagmire is best known for the story behind the module rather than the adventure itself, as game historian John Peterson covered the creation of the module in an article called The Making of a 1980s D&D Module. The article, which I will link, details the module's initial presentation, called Frozen Burial Mounds of the South March. Then it takes you through the process where the adventure then turns into Quagmire of the Swamp King, and then just simply Quagmire. The initial concept was a race against time, with the city sinking and the party having to transport its population to another location to save them. Unfortunately, TSR had just had its first major shakeup, and Quagmire went into development hell while Rasmussen worked on other projects. Frank Mincer gave a lot of advice on improving the module in his rather precise and clinical style, just like he did when he gave the Mystara Player's Guide a once-over. The module was revised several times before it was released, but by that time, Rasmussen had been released from TSR and yet another one of their shakeups. The book that hit shelves is the one we are talking about right now. Quagmire is a mess. You're not going to find many people who have read through the adventure and not come up with the same conclusion. It's an almost entirely wilderness module with 2 routes to the city that gives the module its name. One through the swamp directly north of it, or you can take a ship from your starting spot to your destination if you want to go that route. Quagmire did introduce a lot of elements into Mystara that would be adopted and expanded upon later. This is the first appearance of the city of Slagovich. It has a weather chart, though it uses real-world months instead of the Mystaran calendar. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the rather expansive wandering monster charts includes mules, the offspring between horses and donkeys. Those mules. The same mules that are sterile. And you certainly don't have herds of them wandering outside in the wilderness. When I did my original review of the module, Anne Dupuy, a TSR alumni and noted equestrian, made a point to bring that bit of a zoological impossibility to my attention. And I didn't forget, so if you're running this module, make the mules donkeys. Quagmire involves 3 different giant shell cities for the characters to discover. Obviously, the namesake of the module is the city they're looking for. But there is also Thanopolis and the Sunken City, which was originally named Yavdalum. Sound familiar? To save space in the book, all 3 have the exact same floor plan. Each city has exactly 49 rooms, which isn't a lot of space for a city when you think about it. When you get to a specific room, you look at the entry and check out which one of the cities that you're in, and the module tells you what's in the room. Yes, it saves a lot of space, but it has no originality. There's no reason all 3 cities should have the same floor plan. They're not even cities, they're just tall buildings. The module says Quagmire is a significant trading post in this region, but only a few dozen people live there. To annoy DMs even further, the Sunken City has no plot hook. The characters have to stumble across it, and it's not even visible at night. There's a chance they could sail right past it and never even notice. If you do guide them to the city, you're going to need to get the rules for underwater adventuring from Rafts of Kron or the Sea Peoples, because those rules don't exist in BEMCI yet. If the party wants to take the sea route, the Dungeon Master is going to need to find a way to challenge them. There are very few planned encounters in Quagmire, and almost all of them are for the land route. It suggests strongly hampering the party with bad weather or something similar to try to slow them down, but you can only throw so many storms at a party before they think you've just got it in for them. Of the planned encounters, approximately 2/3 of them are for the parties taking the land route. Almost half of the random encounters for the sea route are just there to destroy their ships and make them walk or force them to take lifeboats to Quagmire. The sea route is by far the safest and fastest of the 2 ways to get to Quagmire, and it's up to the DM to make it interesting, or else it's going to be less of an adventure and more of a taxi service. You can sink the ship, But that's a boring option, and the party's going to expect it. Having a Kraken randomly show up and drag the ship under the waves is a bit stereotypical. This option doesn't give you much to work with, but then again it doesn't give you much to work with at all. The land route is by far the more exciting route, as in stuff actually happens without you accidentally stumbling across it. It's also slower and more treacherous, which is going to make the players not want to take it. The path introduces the characters to not just Slagovich, but also Sea Camel and Mule Beach, 2 towns on the coastline. There's not much about these 3 cities in the book, as half their entries are cut and paste from each other. Repetition is a central theme in Quagmire, and it shows in many of the entries. The characters taking the land route just follow the trail, hit all the ambushes and random encounters, deal with multiple illnesses, spoiled provisions, and quite a few classic Mystaran monsters. Oh, and several bad guys performing a public service. After the 7th day of making saving throws against tropical diseases, the party will start to wonder why they didn't take the sea route. Going this way has the reputation of being a slog, and for good reason. Then you have the problem with the triple cities. They're identical in layout, and don't think the players won't notice that, especially if you have an old-school mapper. The cities have very little in terms of scale, and Quagmire is a major trade stop in this region with a population of 50 people. There's nothing to showcase these are actual cities. Instead, just dungeons that need to be cleared out room by room. When the characters reach the end of Quagmire, the dying chief tells them that they are now the leaders of his people, and they need to go to Thanopolis. That means the characters are now in charge of 42 starving civilians and tasked with dragging them across 400 miles of dense jungle, or fitting them on a small ship and sailing around the island where the characters will need to carve their way through Thanopolis, so the few survivors can starve to death there. And no, they don't want to go anywhere else, despite pretty much any place other than Thanopolis having food. The sunken city is filled with hostile mermen, without any reason given why they are automatically hostile. That's just an underwater dungeon with monsters to kill. Quagmire is not a good adventure. It has little to do, and it leaves much to the DM to fill out just for the characters to have an adventure. Granted, people complain about 5th edition leaving too much for the DM to do for an adventure to work. Still, this module is a perfect example of how that's been a problem since the early days of D&D. The maps showcase how little there is in the Serpent Peninsula, with just a few towns to the north and some scattered settlements in the southern section. The party's going to be walking for miles or sailing for days with little to do. One major problem is this area is enormous compared to the Isle of Dread, which had more encounters in a smaller area. Quagmire gives you a letter with instructions on where to go, punctuated with a sense of urgency. There's little incentive to explore. This module was the first adventure to be entirely rewritten by another release. Champions of Mystara kept the map, but threw out all the contents, except for Slagovich, which got a rewrite of its own. Mule Beach and Sea Camel were literally wiped off the map. Actual nations took the place of the empty islands in the original. Yavdalum went from the name of the sunken city to a nation of diviners that took up most of the original map. The 3 spiral cities were removed entirely, and towns that actually resembled places where people would live replaced them. Bruce Hurd, the line editor of Mystara, turned Thanopolis into Tanakumba and claimed that the original name was given to it by Minrathadian merchants. He also turned it into a real town with a sustainable population. Then he placed the events of Quagmire in Mystara's distant past. So what's the point of a module that doesn't have much to do and was so poorly received that its own editor rewrote the entire region? If nothing else, it has many things you can steal for your own adventures. Don't think of this as an adventure module, but a sourcebook that you can pillage ideas from. It does give you 3 versions of the same dungeon, so if you need a quick module for your characters, just have them run across one of the shell cities. The encounter charts are rather detailed, so crib them if you want an adventure running through a jungle. Quagmire doesn't skimp on environmental rules, including weather charts and even rules for things like quicksand or worse. You can get the module for very little. It's not in great demand if you want an original copy, and the POD doesn't cost much at all. Despite its poor reputation, Quagmire did start to tie the world together. It's one of the first modules to reference locations from other adventures. Specularum, Pramayama, and Sind, and the Isle of Dread all get a mention as possible starting points for the characters. The module has a focus on caravans and similar, something that later gazetteers like Darrican and Minrathad focused on. That's Quagmire. I think it was number 6 on my worst BEMCI module list for all the reasons I've mentioned. It's got lots of nothing with little to explore. Several sections of the module cut and paste text, and the identical shell cities are some of the worst dungeon designs from the TSR era. Still, it's not expensive if you want one for your collection. Water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. Mystara did have an aquatic phase, in the same vein as it had a silly phase. And one of the key entries to this section of adventure design was X7, Rafts of Kron. It was also the one module in the expert line that was retconned all to pieces but didn't get outright erased with another product, unlike 2 others. The concept of war rafts was great, but the execution was lacking. It's known for its exotic locales, underwater adventuring, and the power spike from hell in the third act. But is the reputation fair? Time to knock out another remaster. I'm Mr. Welch, and down Periscope. First, of course, is the technical stuff, because people put effort into making this adventure and deserve recognition. Bruce Nesmith is the designer, and he has quite a few titles under his belt, as he was the creative designer at TSR, and Bethesda, before they fell to pieces. So if you want the next Elder Scrolls or Fallout game not to suck, make sure they hire Bruce back. You have been warned. The cover is classic Elmore, and that giant does appear in the adventure. Interior art is credited to Jeff Butler, and Diesel LaForce did the cartography. The adventure came out in '84 for levels 9 through 12, and clocks in at the standard 32 pages. Now for the meat of the adventure, and from here on out, here be spoilers. This was one of the first fully aquatic modules, possibly the first for D&D, and definitely the first for Mystara. Every single major encounter in this adventure is either on a boat or under the ocean. It's tied to Irendi in part, with the Minarthad guilds being the people giving you the adventure. But since the guilds wouldn't come out for another 4 years, they don't appear anything like their official appearance. Irendi is similar, with the goal being to rescue a princess. Still, Irendi's monarchs are in a ceremonial position appointed yearly rather than actual rulers. They don't have princesses. To drive the point home, the princess's name, Corina, does not appear in the module at all. It's only on the back cover. She has no characterization, no lines, and she might as well be just a chest of treasure you're sent to recover. Once you find her, you put her on a ship back home, and she's out of the adventure while you keep going to find the big bad. This module is a railroad, despite it being set on the high seas. That makes a bit of sense as you're on a trail of kidnappers and you are trying to get clues in a specific order. If you want to play this adventure using all the available resources, you need to get a copy of the Creature Crucible Sea Peoples. It's not mandatory to play War Rafts, as it came out after the module, but it fleshes out a lot of the creatures and cultures you're going to be encountering here. Trust me, that's one book that you need to play this properly. Oh, and memorize the rules for underwater combat, because you're going to use them for most encounters. Are we ready to get started? It's too late, you're already on a boat and the mission is underway. Then the entire background of the adventure, including the trip to Minarthad, an entire week of testing to prove you're ready, and the payment negotiations is handled in 6 short paragraphs, keeping with a time-tested method of tell, don't show adventuring. That's not an exaggeration. The module's background is read to you in an as-you-know box set. Roleplay this out. Seriously, this is about as lazy a setup for a module as I've ever seen. Even more than the classic, you've been hired to kill all the rats in the kitchen intro modules. If the party rescues the princess and stops the pirates, they get their own domains in Minarthad. Kind of like how you got rewarded with land in Sid Meier's Pirates when you did a really good job. The last truly epic pirate game ever made. Yes, even better than Assassin's Creed Pirate Simulator. After filling in the characters and explaining why they're there and where they're going and what they're looking for, they're immediately attacked by Tritons riding towboats towed by giant seahorses, casting spells and throwing spears. It's actually pretty epic. Aiding them in this attack are 20 highly trained attack sea termites. I'm not making that up, it's literally in the book. They are there to sink the ship, and the characters will have a hard time stopping them, as this is probably the first time they're dealing with a sea battle. The Tritons are in their natural element. The party's ship does not have a lot of hit points, and there are a lot of sea termites. They can win the fight, but it's not going to be easy. They can surrender, in which case they are allowed to get to the lifeboats. And don't worry, the module has made plans for the party to lose. Because all of a sudden, it's Coom time! That's right, everybody's favorite storm giant in all of D&D is making his debut as soon as the Tritons are gone. Doesn't matter if the ship is sunk, the party escapes, or they are floating in lifeboats. The party's in a pickle. Their boat is heavily damaged, or it's at the bottom of the ocean. But out of nowhere, the Coomster shows up with a smile on his face, and a magical boat willing to help. Got to love you some Deus Ex Machina. If the party attacks him, he leaves, and they're screwed. But you barely survived a fight with a Triton. You're not much of a threat to the gnarliest storm giant alive. He loads everybody up in his undersea boat and lets you all chill at his undersea castle. Once you get to the castle, he offers them all sorts of help because he is one seriously hoopy fruit. He breaks out his stash for the party. In this case, his stash is a magical goldfish that gives the party water breathing and the ability to swim at full speed for a day. He tells the Minarthad captain and crew, don't worry, he's going to Uber them back to Minarthad and not even ask for a tip, because there's some serious swells in Irendi that he's not going to miss. Then he breaks out his map, tells everybody what's going on in the underwater wilderness, and tells them where the Kingdom of the Tritons is. Coom doesn't know where Kron is, but he will tell them to pal up with a dolphin because they know the way. He'll even sell them his ride for 10,000 gold pieces, or a magic item of equal or greater value, because the Coomster is a seriously righteous dude and he recognizes the parties as some gnarly bros. And after that, the module gets a lot harder. Everybody heads to Suthus, the city of the Tritons, where they can fight their way in or ask nicely. If they choose violence, they're all going to die because the Tritons are trained to deal with invaders and all of them cast spells. So the characters might just want to play nice, and the Triton King would welcome them as guests. The king will strip the party of any weapons and magic items as reasonable, but denies any involvement in the attacks and returns their gear once their audience ends. That's when the adventure goes all worm-tongue, as not one but two advisors seek their help, claiming the other guy is a spy magically controlling the king. The party can side with either, or neither, but if they guess wrong, they will be arrested and offered for sacrifice if they can't escape. If they choose correctly, their ally will guide them to the castle so they can deal with the evil counterpart. It turns out that a Velia, or underwater vampire, is using the Triton King Lopra to provide him with weekly sacrifices. The king has been charmed to send a victim to the vampire regularly, and he prefers to send surface creatures rather than his own Tritons. The party has to eliminate the Velia's agent, which frees the king, who thanks the party and sends them to find Kron to take care of the evil minions there. Then the king says he will stop the raiding immediately. Unfortunately, there are princesses in another castle, or in this case, war raft. Kron is a floating city comprised of 14 different rafts of various sizes. These have been lashed together, each serving a different purpose for the town. Kron used to be a peaceful settlement, with the population surviving by fishing and diving down to shipwrecks when they came across them. They weren't a hostile people, happy to trade with Minrathadians and Irindi when the opportunity presented itself. The city is rather sturdy and has never lost a raft in a storm. The population is split on whether this is due to magic or just because they really know how to lash rafts together. The module doesn't give you a population for Kron, but it's at least several dozen people just from the listed NPCs. When the party gets there, they're confronted by catamaran-riding guards who want to know why they're there. If they fight, again, they have to deal with the whole city. But at least Kron isn't underwater with wall-to-wall fish people that cast spells. Still, it's a lot easier if they talk. If the group arrives at the raft city after they get to Suthus, the princess is here. But if they reach Kron first, the princess will be in Suthus. Either way, the king will not free her because he has made an agreement with King Lopra to turn her over. And again, you end up with another worm-tongue incident with advisors blaming each other for the king being an agent of evil. And once again, the party has to deal with the evil advisor to remove the charm from King One-Eye. If a story element works, why not use it twice? Even if it's literally back-to-back chapters. Once the party has freed both charmed kings from their evil advisors, they will learn who is behind the raids, the Velia Hadric. He's been chilling out in his sunken ruins at Koladar and needs to be stopped. The problem is that Velia have a whole host of special abilities, and the only way to kill one permanently is to drag him out of the water. Good luck doing that at the bottom of the ocean. The party must now reduce him to 0 hit points, find his lair, and drive a stake through his heart. And again, good luck with that. Remember, their magic goldfish only last a day, so they're going to have to find other ways to breathe water and survive at the bottom of the ocean. Or else they're going to implode like the Titanic sub when they dive too deep. DMs, you need to ensure the party can finish this adventure with the appropriate magic items, or they're just going to flat out give up once they've rescued the princess. So the good guys swim over to the Lost City with undead to fight a sea vampire on his terms. Have fun. Seriously, the difficulty spike in the third act of this module is ridiculous, with hordes of level drainers throughout the dungeon. There are incredibly lethal traps like darkened caverns filled with oozes on the wall, so if you touch anything, you're going to be attacked. There's a room magically filled with acid that offers no warning about its contents when you swim through that door. And this is all underwater and often indoors. You will have wizards that can't use their best spells, fighters are restricted on the weapons they can use, and you aren't bringing hired help with you on this one. The cleric will get a workout, and a TPK is very possible in the last chapter. The entire romp through Koldahar makes Ravenloft look like a Disney tour. Illumination is a major issue. You can't precisely light a torch, and sunlight doesn't reach this far. They can't take rests to recover hit points because then your magic spells allowing you to breathe will expire. You do find a magic sword devoted to slaying Hadric, though it can't actually kill him, but it does force him back into a crypt in his sunken castle. There's a lot of treasure here, but again you're limited on what you can carry because water-breathing spells don't work very well on donkeys. Let the party learn this when they throw their first mule overboard and just watch it sink. Then watch them get slapped around by the druid for trying something that idiotic in the first place. Now comes the unfun part. Velias take a full 2 levels off when they hit you. Various wraiths and specters also swim around, along with weresharks, dragon turtles, more than a few golems and living statues, and all sorts of minor undead, and all of them are gunning for the party. You can free up a few captives here and they will aid you in your quest, but don't get too attached to them. This doesn't even count the vampiric charm effect that Velias have. Unless the party gets their hands on the magical sword of Hadric slaying. I'm not joking, the module has a magic sword devoted to just killing the bad guy. It negates a lot of his abilities, but still can't permanently kill him. But it does remove his charm effects as a threat. To make matters worse, Hadric's standard attack is to flow like a water current behind the cleric and attack him with surprise. This module pulls no punches. It reached meat grinder status in the space of one act. That's impressive. That's Rafts of Kron. This is a disjointed module, to say the least. It has some great ideas, like the Raft City that is never mentioned again anywhere. But the third act is absolutely lethal. The party is put in an environment that is hostile to them. They're on the home turf of a very nasty bad guy, and they have very limited healing. So you're going to have to be pillow-fisted, or they're going to hate this module when they are done. But steal from it as much as you want. The adventure might not have been great, but some of the settings were memorable. Plus, you know you want to keep the characters running into the Coomster. He might not fight alongside the party, but everybody will appreciate his radical surfing skills. Sometimes, getting there is half the fun. Other times, it sucks out all the fun. Welcome to Mystara for the latest remaster, Drums on Fire Mountain, the one with the infamous cover art of the Samoan pig orcs. However, there's a lot more to this module. It provides a unique challenge that few adventures do. This one has you on a time limit, a hard time limit. There will be very little in the way of resting, so you have maybe one chance to rest and recover your spells. All the while, you're on an island filled with hundreds of hostile Kara, and you are there to kill their immortal, or at least the guy posing as their immortal. Where have I seen this plot before? I'm Mr. Welch, and prepare to play D&D's least kosher module. Technical stuff, first and foremost. Drums on Fire Mountain is a 1984 release from TSR UK, the site of TSR famed for their story-driven adventures. It was written by the immortal Graham Morris and Tom Kirby, with Brian Ruiz and Paul Williams doing the art and cartography. It's a bit short at 28 pages, but does feature some rather flavorful interior design, as much of the box text has a tiki vibe. Not that the players will ever see that. There is some handout art as well, something from the old days that needs to see a return, especially in the days of just putting all the extras online. You go to the temple entrance, and then show the players the art from a resource without having to cut up your book. This needs to be a thing again. This module, possibly more than any other, is a perfect example of how bad art can kill a good game. If you ask people what they know about the adventure, it'll be the cover art. Fat green orcs with afros and an undeniable Polynesian vibe. Not the nail-biting sneaking around, not the improved internal graphics, and certainly not the actual adventure. The art is that memorable, and not in a good way. When I was looking to update the older monsters for modern Mystara, the Kara were the second ones to get the makeover. No one yet has preferred the older art to the Rubus reimagining. Now that we've fixed the module's most significant problem, according to the people who can't tell you about the module itself past the art, we can now look at the adventure itself. The party is hired by a Thaisian bureaucrat for a simple task, to track down the wizard Kalnaka and stop him from attacking Thyata's shipping. In other words,
terminate with extreme prejudice.
The party gets their briefing and is informed they have a window of approximately 48 hours to get in, kill the target, and return to their ship. The target must die before the ceremony is concluded, hence the strict time limit. They will not receive any help from the crew once there, but they can keep anything they can take from the island, and if successful, everybody gets paid 5,000 in gold pieces each. As the Kara on the island number in the hundreds, stealth is heavily recommended, or they're going to be swarmed. This is a guerrilla raid, not a kill-em-all. There is no time to rest when they get to the island, and more importantly, nowhere to rest. The Kara won't know they are there until they give themselves away, but nobody is coming in for a rescue if they screw up. There is no retreating from the dungeon, healing up, and going back in. This adventure is one of the most difficult because it gives the party one chance to get the job done right. Beat them over the head with that information. One of the most challenging aspects of this module is that the Kara will play it intelligently. Most of the villains will. If you start taking out sentries, they notice. If you wipe out a patrol, they will know something's up when it doesn't return. The natives will catch on if you start blowing stuff up, setting things on fire, or leaving a trail of bodies to be followed. Then they adapt their tactics. Patrols get larger, sentries get doubled, and the number of bad guys looking for you are increased. They will start expecting trouble, and they will change their tactics accordingly. Remember, there are about 400 of them and only 6 characters. The odds are not in their favor. The players will need to do things like scout the island to see where the best place is to avoid all the patrols. Going through the thicker parts of the jungle or the swamps, which the patrols avoid, is the wiser choice, though it means you must fight more challenging monsters. And there is no resting. Healing is limited to whatever spells and magic items you brought with you. Even though this is an assassination mission, it's best to avoid combat until the very end. Good luck getting players to understand this. But not all is lost. While the most direct route to the lair of the big bad is through the village, it's not the best route. The Karakara are superstitious, and as such are also predictable. They will not patrol after dark because that's when the nastier monsters appear. This means a fast-moving party can search for a way into the underground temple where Kalnaka can be found. During the initial briefing, they were given a general idea of where one of these entrances could be found. When they realize they won't be bothered by patrols at night, it gives them a little more leeway in their search. Remember that night is when the bigger monsters come out, so stealth is still a factor. Every wound received, spell cast, and charge expended is one less they have when they reach the end. Discretion trumps valor in almost all cases in this module. Side note, if you are the Dungeon Master and plan to run this adventure as part of the campaign, let them load up on healing items in advance. Despite the module's time limit and the large number of baddies, a lot of combat is almost unavoidable. There's enough time allotted to them for a single rest, assuming they can find a spot where the monsters won't discover them. Let them know it isn't like similar style adventures. They must keep moving and there's no time for lollygagging. Have them hit up the alchemist before they leave, and if they have any potions left over after the adventure, consider it a victory. Drums will drain their resources, but fortunately compared to other editions, BEMCI doesn't shy away from handing out magic items. And if you're going to run drums, I highly recommend you use the skill systems from either the Rule Cyclopedia or the Gazetteers. This one's going to use a lot of stealth, and you'll need to survive in the jungle for at least half the adventure. BEMCI doesn't do the full-on ranger, but players can make one easily enough with the skill system. I wouldn't suggest throwing the parties an NPC ranger. This is an expert-level adventure after all. They should be able to take care of themselves. Still, their patron does have some information about not just the target, but also the surface defenses, allowing the characters to take the necessary precautions before landing. The party needs to learn quickly that their target is going to be located underground, and remaining on the surface is a very bad idea. There is an obvious entrance in the Karakara village, but that route is going to be almost suicide because of the large number of baddies dancing around in their ritual. There are other entrances, but the party's going to have to search for them. You can make them work to find the other doors or let them stumble across one to get the story moving. Once they find one of the entrances, Drums evolves from a hex crawl to a dungeon crawl in short order. The island is only about 6 miles by 7 miles at its broadest sections, so it shouldn't be hard for them to reach the destinations. The buildings that hold the doors are not hidden and are easy to find once you know what you're looking for. The party will still have to play smart because there's not a lot of distance for the monsters to cover either. Once the characters are underground, it doesn't get any easier. The theme of Drums seems to be quantity, and the monsters they run into will often be in the double-digit variety, except the Sturge Gauge. That's in the triple-digit variety with those flappy-winged parasites. Not all of them at once, mind you, but in waves. Again, dumb parties aren't going to last long in this adventure. Worst of all is all the new monsters and how they seem to be designed to freak out the players. Like the Topi, these shrunken-headed zombies ambush the characters when they reach the creepy part of the dungeon. They aren't that powerful, but their timing is perfect. Most combats with them have the party responding in the same way. But that brings us to one of the strengths of this module, all the new monsters. This is a TSR UK product, after all. They would create an entire host of new monsters for the books if they thought they could get away with it. Drums is no exception, giving us some of Mystara's most memorable beasties. I've already talked about the Karakara and the Topi, and we have 3 more that first appear in this module. We get the fundamentals, the pigeons of the elemental planes. Not kidding, these are just the equivalent of birds, only made out of the relevant elements. They aren't a threat individually, they just do minor damage by ramming into you. The catch is there's usually lots of them. They're an interesting addition to the elemental ecology, serving as the simple animals. The Kalmaru are the elemental creatures of air that swarm over ships and tear apart the crew. They are nasty, and they get much more detail later in the Gazetteers, specifically in the island nations like Minrathad. The Agarat is another type of ghoul. One of the nastiest is this one has a ranged level drain attack. Granted, it's only temporary compared to the permanent melee level drain attacks, but old school players will clench just from thinking of that possibility. As far as I can tell, this is the only ranged level drain attack in all of D&D from any edition. Treat these guys with respect and kill them quickly. The walking dead man in this adventure is Kalnaka, and he is one of the nastier villains in any Mystara module. He's a wizard who also happens to be a devil swine. That means he's got a built-in charm attack, and he can take a beating on top of that. He was a spellcaster obsessed with shape-changing magic, and like most good wizards with nefarious intentions, liked to experiment on lycanthropes to learn their secrets. One finally got loose and mauled him and turned him into a devil swine. He escaped with his daughter and 3 adventurers who were loyal to him, and charmed on top of that to keep them loyal, and they arrived at Teku Nuraria, where the Karakara saw him in his half-piggy form and thought he was their deity. He likes their devotion, but he doesn't let it go to his head.
They call me Mr.
Now he commands the Karakara, as well as controlling the Kalmaru to get vengeance on the mainlanders, who unfairly cast him out because of a paltry few dozen excessively cruel instances of kidnapping, torture, and murder. He is a highly intelligent opponent, and a clever one at that. The party is there to kill him, but he's a wizard specializing in shape-changing magic. There's a good chance the corpse the party brings back isn't going to be the right one. Then we get to Marie, Kalna's daughter, and of course the object of affection for all the Randy character types out there. Despite a neutral alignment in BEMCI, she's rather evil, utterly devoted to her father, and really good at lying. She knows the layout of the lair like the back of her hand, and if she can talk the party into rescuing her, she will gladly get them utterly lost after directing them into various monsters and traps. She plays characters like a fiddle, can act like a helpless victim, or a competent adventurer, or anything in between if it wins over their confidence. Even if she takes them to her father, she will find out a way to communicate with him in advance all the information about the party he needs to know. If the party thinks with their privates, she is going to lead them straight into a trap. If they figure out her game, she will tell them everything that they want to know, just not everything they need to know. She will feign surrender, pretend to switch sides, and do everything else that she can think of that they will fall for. If they tie her up and leave her, she's got several magic items that will enable her escape. Drums on Fire Mountain is a well-written module that unfortunately doesn't sit well with many players because of all the restrictions that it places on them. A lot of modern players want all of their resources available for every encounter. This module is the opposite of that. Time is actually important for once. The characters are seriously outnumbered. They can't solve this adventure by hacking through the bad guys. They will run out of hit points or time before they run out of the bad guys. They must pick and choose battles, avoid fights, and budget resources. Kalmaka is a challenging villain, especially since he's not an idiot. He will cut and run if he thinks he's in danger. He won't think twice about sending dozens of mooks to swarm the party while he scampers off. If you want a copy, a classic module runs about $40, and this is in POD form for about $10 to $15. It takes a big man to admit that he was wrong. And while I stand an even 6 foot, I don't know if that qualifies for big. But I did say in my Bottom of Mystara videos that Savage Coast was better than Quagmire. After rereading both modules for these remasters, I will adjust my statement and say that Savage Coast was indeed the inferior of the two modules. I didn't say Quagmire was superior, as both modules are still bad. Still, what makes Savage Coast one of the worst Mystara adventures written? It's simply a matter of what the module uses for a plot.
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
I'm Mr. Welch, and you will get nothing, and enjoy it. This is not an easy review, as you will soon see. Usually, I review things that give you something to talk about. Savage Coast gives you just under 1 million square miles of map to explore, with a grand total of 15 fixed locations. 969,408 square miles, to be precise, giving you an encounter on average every 64,627 square miles. I think there's a word to describe this kind of population density.
Empty. The opposite of full.
Thank you, Jean-Baptiste. Most encounters are encampments of one kind or another, with most being neutral and not wanting visitors. You show up, ask what your business is, and they don't want anything to do with you, regardless of your answer. But more on that later. Assuming I don't fill up the rest of this video with a rant. Might as well get the technicals out of the way, since I have to give credit where credit is due. X9, The Savage Coast, was written in 1985 by Merle Rasmussen, and it is the second sandbox module he wrote after Quagmire, along with Jackie Rasmussen and Anne Gray. And much like Quagmire, this one suffered severely from the chaos at TSR during the time period. Keith Parkinson did the cover art, with a piece I swear has been reused at least 3 times by far superior products. It's like they knew the module blew, but the art was awesome, and by God, they weren't going to let that go to waste. Mark Nelson did the interior art, and again, it was way better than it had any right to be for this adventure. The module is the standard 32 pages with a small pull-out section for the players. From what I could tell, the module was chopped up in the editing process, much like Quagmire, as the actual plot was recycled and put in Dungeon Magazine with Turtles of the Purple Sage, a 2-part adventure that's considered one of the better entries in Dungeon. I know what you're asking, and yes, I am happy to see Greyhawk opened up for the guilds with minimal wizards interference, because I trust the Greyhawk Grognard and his compatriots to make high-quality Orthian source material than the other WotC campaign designers. Now do Mystara. I know what you're asking now, and I can tell you what they replaced the Turtle plotline with. Nothing! The Mystara crew regarded this module poorly, and it was retconned twice. Only one aspect was kept with the 3 trading companies, which were turned into the different inheritor factions when Red Steel replaced it. Even then, they don't resemble their original ideas at all. There was no red curse, as that idea wouldn't be formulated for years after this module. The region was covered in Voyage of the Princess Ark, where it introduced the concept of the Savage Baronies, which are nowhere to be found in the original module. The only thing they kept from the Savage Coast for all future revisions was the map.
You brought us here for nothing!
Savage Coast was part of the Expert series that expanded the map, starting with Master of the Desert Nomads, which gave us the Great Waste, Temple of Doom, which briefly introduced Hool, Quagmire opened up the Serpent Peninsula. This pattern was disrupted by War Rafts of Kron and Drums on Fire Mountain, but then Savage Coast opened up, well, the Savage Coast. It presented the entirety of the region, including the Orc's Head Peninsula, which was left off when the region was retconned with the box set. This was indicated by the internal map highlighting each new region without any explanation. That took up an entire page with a map of areas not relevant to the module. The region you're playing in is mostly on the second page of that map, which takes up about 5% of the sliver of the map that was barely on an almost blank page. Yay, padding and all that. Everything in this module seems to be part of a larger plot element that was dropped. There are precisely 2 encounters if you're exploring the coastline by ship, which involve delaying your trip because of worms eating the hull, and a merman that needs to be rescued from a net. It even mentions the name of your ship in the second encounter, the Primus, once, in passing, and it was never explained how you got the ship or why you were even on it. You get to the first settlement, they ask you about your business, then they slam the door in your face. No answer will get them to let you in. If you fight your way in, you face 200 4th level fighters and discover nothing of value in the complex. There is no treasure, no secrets, nothing worth looting, just a simple compound with 200 people guarding it with no strategic value, and nothing adding to the adventure.
Nothing, eh?
And an annoying part for the DMs, this module refers to all NPCs by their levels. So you don't face level 4 fighters, you're facing heroes. The cut purses are led by a llama, and not the dangerous ones you have to watch out for when you're swimming off the coast of Argentina. Savage Coast takes a lot of elements from the Isle of Dread, but doesn't seem to do anything with them. Multiple factions have come to the region, such as the Lawful Brotherhood, Chaotic Brotherhood, Lawful Alliance, which are the Lupin, the Neutral Alliance, which are the Rakasta, the New Hope, and the Second Chance. None of these groups are given any history, motivations, or explanation. They exist in a vacuum, and it's left for the DMs to explain who they're supposed to be and why they're in the region. They hint, for example, that the Chaotic Brotherhood is there for the gold, but there's practically no gold mining in the region to exploit. At least not anything written, except for a small encounter with some NPCs panning for gold. And I don't see a large evil organization going there to rob 3 guys. There are numerous hints of a lost city for the players to find, much like the Isle of Dread. When the party gets there, they're going to find it comprises 8 buildings guarded by 2 wizards, some living statues, and an undead monster ready to fight them. The players will see the step pyramid in the middle of the city covered in gold. And if they spend 2 months stripping away the veneer, they will earn 200 gold pieces, which is about as much money as they're going to find looting the rest of the city. Oh, that's 200 gold pieces total, not each. The map of the Lost City takes up as much space as the description.
I built this kingdom up from nothing.
This would perfectly showcase how empty this module is. Except right after this, we have the Peaceful Outpost, which is an even better example. That location is a friendly village that will let the players stay there and recover. This is a 3-page encounter plus a 2-page map. It details the Lawful Brotherhood's monastery in some detail, explaining the purpose of each building and the schedules of the inhabitants. Here's a spoiler. There's nothing of any interest going on at this location. The monks living here go about their daily schedules like ordinary people. They have no great treasure, no diabolical secrets, they aren't hiding any great evils, they aren't disguising their true purpose. They're living their lives as ordinary townsfolk would. TSR wasted 5 pages of a 32-page module to tell us this. They even stouted out the chickens and sheep. That's how much text was wasted in this particular session. Fair warning, 60 angry chickens, rules as written, are a danger to a medium-level character. It does give information on non-human races living here, and it looks like an attempt to copy the Isle of Dread, as the Arania and Xanathons have their own settlements, as do the Lupin and Rakasta. The module does introduce turtles and snappers, and at least there's that. The turtles were supposed to have a more prominent role in the module, but that was the adventure that was removed and put in Dungeon Magazine, because it wasn't a bad adventure, but this module had too few pages for way too much information that they were trying to fit. The obvious issue with this module is it was clearly meant to be a source book rather than an adventure, but it's only 32 pages. The box set that replaced it, Red Steel, also had a 32-page source book detailing over a dozen nations on the exact same map, minus the Orc's Head Peninsula. But that part was entirely fluff, there was no game mechanics in it. And even then, it's just brief descriptions. Harath gets 4 pages of discussion, but Hool only gets 4 paragraphs. Savage Coast gave us no new nations, a handful of factions, and little in the way of actual adventure. This was meant to be a hybrid sourcebook/module, but failed at both of them. There have been good examples of these books, like the Blackmore line, but these modules were larger, with the first book being 64 pages. That's the same size as the smaller Gazetteers. There was no way to produce this book in its desired format with its limited size.
Nothing whatever! Nothing whatever!
But enough complaining. Let's fix it. The problem is, how do you fix an empty module without just filling in the blanks? That's not going to be easy, because they have to give you something more than a name and a description without giving you background information behind what's there. Lawful monks peacefully living in an agricultural society isn't exactly screaming high adventure. You need to define who these people are. Why are they in the middle of an unsettled wilderness with no cities? Who is sponsoring them? What are their goals? Who is the predominant species in the region? It mentions Lupin, Rakasta, Arania, and Xanathons, but it doesn't tell you how many of them there are. You've got an area almost the size of Kazakhstan. There will be more going on here than a few camps of random people. One issue you will have with the adventure is grassland isn't the most exciting terrain to prance around in. Of the previous modules that expanded the map, you had deserts, jungles, and swamps. The majority of the territory in Savage Coast has you exploring fantasy Kansas. The fact that instead of using the standard Mystara hex grid template, they have a hand-drawn hex grid map, which is not up to par. This area is ridiculously underpopulated for a region of its size. It has navigable rivers, expansive coastlines, and a temperate climate. This should be swarming with life, rather than the main settlement in the massive swamp called the Bayou, having a total of 30 caiman. The total population of all the plant encounters in Savage Coast is less than 1,000, in a land 3 times the size of Italy. This is where you double down on Mystara's Cold War vibes. There's a gold rush going on. Swarm the entire region with expeditions from every nation you can justify. Minrathad and Darrakan would have trading posts everywhere, along with sponsored mining companies. Thyatis and Hul would have sizable military contingents guarding their interest. Independent gold miners would flock to the region almost daily. The party can't travel any distance without encountering a boomtown.
Sometimes nothing can be a real cool hand.
What happens to the local population depends on which camps grow up next to them. Darrakan would probably work with them. Minrathad would drive off the competition. Thyatis and Hul would have a new source of cheap labor. There's a gold rush in a region that is rapidly getting colonized. There's no stopping it. People aren't organizing the natives to fight back. Those are Stone Age primitives fighting off well-funded and organized invaders and settlers. The best the players can do is to try to get the natives some degree of recognition from the new arrivals. If nothing else, turn the adventure into a theme about the loss of wilderness. This isn't like the Isle of Dread. Savage Coast has very few geological barriers standing in the way of the characters. You land your ship, you build a shelter, you plant some crops, you send out some fishermen, and you've got a functioning settlement. You can't do that in a jungle, swamp, or desert. Now imagine an entire coastline hundreds of miles long where this is possible.
Ain't nothing but a thing.
It can be more than nothing. You can make a campaign about it, but that would require you to write it from scratch because all this module gives you is the map. Welcome to Mystara for a long overdue remaster. Red Arrow Black Shield. The War module. The one with all the stuff, after you look at Night's Dark Terror. It's possibly the adventure with the grandest scope released for D&D ever. You're in a world war. Not a piddly conflict that you get caught up in, not a tiny fraction of a war like a single battle. The players watch the Master and Darrakan go 10 rounds with hundreds of armies and hundreds of thousands of troops. But that leads to the module's biggest flaw, the one that old-time players linger on and that new players are confused by. It put the cart before the horse. Before the known world as introduced in Isle of Dread was finally written, Red Arrow Black Shield expanded on all the nations, and many of them do not resemble their final form. Now we're looking into why this ended up getting this module retconned out of existence, or at least kick forward 200 years. I'm Mr. Welch, and war, it's just a shot away. Just a shot away. Red Arrow Black Shield, or RABS, is the 10th module in the Expert series, written in 1985 and following the Savage Coast, but it's a direct follow-up to the Desert Nomads series. Michael Dobson, an established war game editor at TSR, wrote it. He was the one that designed the Battle System box set for TSR, an attempted rival to Warhammer Fantasy. He also created several Dragonlance modules and is the author of the legendary Bloodstone Pass series. Make a special note about his design of the Battle System rules, as that's very important. Terry Dykstra did the interior art, and Jeff Easley did the cover, which is obviously a repurposed Dragonlance cover. Those are Draconians. Red Dragon Army Draconians, to be precise. The Red Dragon Army of Draconians, which are definitely not in Mystara. This adventure has the Master of Hul invade Western Darrakan in an attempt to conquer the Merchant Nation as revenge for Hul's defeat in the module Temple of Death. How did he come back to life? How did he build such a massive army after his embarrassing defeat? A wizard did it. Just go with that. Ironically enough, future expansion into the Master's history and future products addresses the continuity problem, with the Master being constantly reincarnated after his death, so he will always return to power in Hull, even if it's in a different body. He's still the Master. The adventurers survive the start of hostilities and get pressed into finding allies for Darrican. The war has higher-level adventurers, but they're doing higher-level adventurer stuff. It even has the characters from the LJ and Toyline making a cameo, meaning Strongheart and the rest of his trademarked friends are canonically Mystaran. The party is doing all the diplomacy and stuff because they're the highest level characters they can be spared for the task. Everybody above them is on the front line or commanding the armies in the background. You will notice the date of the module is 1985. That date is important because the Gazetteers didn't arrive until 2 years later. This module predates all of the known world by 2 years, and boy does it show. That's the glaring problem with the module, is the release of the Nation books almost immediately retconned it. Glaring differences exist between the Rabs version of Nations and the Gazetteer versions of Nations. Some, like Ethengar, you won't recognize at all from their final version. The module is meant to be a high-level campaign, as several times it tells the players to complete other published modules to gain loyalty for various nations. But the early versions of the countries are glaring. Minorthad doesn't have any elves, and the players win their loyalty through bribery, a far cry from the cold and calculating diverse nation that was the 9th Gazetteer. Few of the current leaders appear in any form in Rabs. Rabs is known for all the stuff it comes with. Well, not as much swag as Nightstar Terror. That includes a complete map of the known world, plus a chit representing every military unit in it. While it falls firmly into second place compared to Nightstar Terror in terms of stuff, there's a real steep drop for third place. Unfortunately, this makes finding a complete copy expensive. The POD versions today do not come with chits or the map, unfortunately, and you need them to play the module as intended fully. Full versions in average condition run about $200 at least, and online versions don't have a battle simulator for VTT play. This adventure was made to be played in person and on a real table. Technology has not caught up to this monster of a module yet. The actual adventure has the players running across the known world getting allies for Darrican. To achieve this, they must raise their allies' diplomacy score to a certain level, while their master's forces are trying to reduce it to a certain level. If a nation falls between those two levels, they stay neutral. Some governments are already friends with Darrican, like the Shires, others are already hostile, like Yelarum. Some nations are affected by the actions of other countries, so if Yelarum sides with the Master, Thyatis is easier to convince to fight for Darrican, but most of them will have some quest to prove their loyalty, sometimes another module entirely, and others are just, go here and kill this monster. Most of the meat of this module is loyalty missions for the various nations, making Red Arrow Black Shield the Mass Effect 2 of D&D, if it didn't predate Mass Effect 2 by 15 years. TSR was not keen on metaplot just yet, and saw how much this adventure jacked up the known world. The known world that hadn't been written yet. When Karamikos came out, Rabs was kicked 200 years into the future, and all the borders and governments didn't change at all. Along with Quagmire and Savage Coast, its history didn't exist anymore. While a world war would be amazing to play in, this would have destroyed the setting before it got a chance to start. Consider Rab's alternate history, but a cool wargame to boot. There are two aspects to this game players have to deal with. The first part I've already addressed. Go to a nation, take a quest, win the loyalty, in theory. Bog standard D&D. Then you have the army phase, where the DM will play as the Master's forces and the players command the Allied forces. The Master vastly outclasses the Darrican forces at first, but as the war progresses and more nations rally to Darrican, the tide begins to turn. If two forces meet, combat is done with the War Machine system. No, not the wargame that I spent thousands of dollars on that destroyed itself with poor game balance and a power creep that made GW jealous, but the mass combat system that was included in the companion box set the previous year. If players wanted detailed combat, they needed to use the battle system rules, despite it being for 2nd edition. TSR really wanted you to play battle system, so it was going to be in this module, even if the rules didn't support it. Of course, you could still do the battles narratively, but that means you didn't get to buy the latest box set, so get those silly thoughts out of your head and consume product, people. Fair warning, as written, this module is rather difficult in the early going. It reminds me of Fortress America, where the Master gets all of his troops at once and Darrican has a skeleton force and has to hold out hope, while fresh troops are reinforcing them. And units will get mauled in this game. The 15th Legion of Darrican is of poor troop quality, but you can have them hold a vital pass against the Master's forces while Allied troops speed to their defense. If you're good enough or lucky enough, you can arrive in time to push back the Master's armies and give the brave soldiers of the 15th Legion a proper burial. Time is a factor in the game. Players will watch as the campaign unfolds week after week, and unless they can work fast, it won't unfold in their favor from the start. Nothing impresses on the players that they had better move fast after watching one town after another disappear under the tide of Hulian forces. If you're going to play this module, update it to the Gazetteers. That's the glaring issue with Rabs. Karamikos has the Baron start a civil war with the Duke. Like Von Hendrix is ever going to swear allegiance to another leader. The Etruscan clans are numerous in Rabs and not isolationist to the extreme now. You'll find troop levels at odds with how the nations are written, like Ostland having the fewest troops in the northern reaches. I tried to see if anyone had updated Rabs with the Gazetteers on the vaults, but no such luck. One of the biggest issues the players have is that there's nations that are supposed to be allied with the Master. Those are Ethengar and Yalarum, two countries that are not going to side with a religious fanatic opposing their religions. You know the module needs to be updated when the 5 Shires gets a loyalty bonus if Darrican allies with Glantry. The adventure continues until the players can confront the Master and end him and the war. To do this, they need to assemble the magic dagger of Master Slaying, whose parts are conveniently scattered across the various nations they will be visiting. Convenient how that works. They will have to fight his personal guard with their assigned bodyguards in mass combat. The more nations they're allied with, the better their allied forces. If they unite the known world, they're going to have an elite unit from each of the various nations. One thing to note is that while players will be looking at each unit's battle rating, the number of troops those units represent is just as significant. Yalarum sends 14 armies with a battle rating of 151, if they join the war, compared to Thyatis sending 5 armies with a battle rating of 91. A Yalarum army has 751 soldiers, compared to Thyatis, who brings 3,310 troops per unit. A 4-to-1 troop ratio is worth plus 60 points on the battle chart. Larger forces tend to have worse battle ratings, but that balances out quickly in the outnumber bonus. When this module is over, most of the world will be a smoking ruin. The Master will overrun several nations. The Allies don't have the early strength to stop him. This is going to wreck most campaigns as planned. Even if the characters rally the high-quality troops of the eastern nations, it will take them a while to reach the front lines. There's a good chance Glantry, Darrican, and the Shires will be ravaged before the other armies can push back the Master. If you had your heart set on turning Ithildown Castle into a vacation home after the war, there's a good chance the Master levels it for catapult parts. After he cuts the demon there, I check for damages. That's probably why the module suggests Conquest of the Warlords for the next adventure. Why not try a domain in lovely Norwold this year? Come see the majestic lakes, the virgin forests, the unsalted fields, the unburning buildings, and the still-living population. If you're going to go all in on playing Rabs, find a safe place to store the map. This module takes months. Hundreds of chits are going to be moved around every turn. Every hex is numbered so you can write down where every unit is from week to week. Well, that's a ton of record keeping. Now you can take a picture of the board with your camera, which is just a slight reprieve. This is not an adventure for people with cats. Just warning you, this module can consume people in its complexity. Wargamers are especially prone to getting a little too into playing Rabs. It's the chits. If you're going to play D&D with Wargamers, you're going to have to put up with their chits. Is Rabs a good adventure? Yes, without question. Does it have severe issues regarding the known world? Also yes, without question. This is a gloriously ambitious module that few even attempted to follow. But it was years ahead of its time, and it's largely unrecognizable by fans of the setting today. It's as if someone started to make art for Tolkien's works for their game, but then people read Fellowship of the Ring, and they're confused by how it describes Aragorn utterly differently from how Tolkien described him. So now you have many Tolkien fans wondering who the complete stranger at Helm's Deep is and where Aragorn is. So like when the party gets to Glantry and Prince Yager is a friendly man, supportive of their cause, and willing to help without any strings attached. Players will wonder who this guy is and what he did with the actual Prince Yager. But if Rabs had come out after the Gazetteer series, it would be viewed as a favorable alternative to Wrath of the Immortals. But it predates those books and needs serious retconning to make it work. That might actually be a good video project in the future. Regardless, if you're a wargame fan, it's worth it for the scenarios you can come up with yourself alone. That would actually make a fantastic turn-based computer game if anybody's listening. But enough about Rabs. If you want a complete working copy, it's going to set you back about $200. There's a POD for $10. It doesn't have the maps and it doesn't have the chits that you can easily use. Welcome to Mystara. I'm Mr. Welch, and let's get started. I'm going to be talking about the expert level modules because I've almost talked about all of them, and then I can start going into like accessories and stuff, or even talk about the Vaults of Pandios or the various people that contribute a lot to Mystara still. So this week's offering is X11, Saga of the Shadow Lord, written in 86 by Stephen Dorn. And this one is the one that introduced us to 3 new areas that were never talked about. The nations of Windar, Dinagoth, and Esoria. And I won't lie, when I got this module, I was extremely disappointed. And I kind of still am, because this module had so much promise. It was the largest module ever written. It's even longer than Night's Dark Terror, and it's promising us these new lands to talk about. And they don't talk about them. It's actually two separate modules crammed together. They're both linked by the Shadow Lord, who later becomes the Wraith Lord. But the module doesn't challenge itself. It doesn't go hardly into any detail on any of the new nations it introduces. I know this is written 3 years before the Gazetteer series started, but still, tell us something about what the Windar people are like, or what the evil Denegothians are. Both modules are essentially MacGuffin hunts. The first one is arguably better than the second one. The second one was extremely disappointing because it's just go get this MacGuffin and go and track down the Wraith Lord in his castle or dungeon if you want to do that, and then kill him. That's it. That's the plot of the second adventure. You've got a 60-page module, and it's pretty much just room descriptions as you go from room to room, killing everything that you encounter until you get to the big bad, kill him, and then the adventure's over. That's not really a D&D game I want to play. That sounds more like a game of Munchkin. The first module, the MacGuffin you're tracking down, is the Elven Star. This is the artifact that makes Windar a wonderful, snow-covered elf land where everybody's happy and singing. And now they're out of water and they're really sick, so they need you to go infiltrate the Denegoth plateau, find the Elven Star, bring it back, and everybody will be happy. This module actually does do some challenges, because there's a lot of encounters that you can get through if you impersonate the bad guys, and there's some encounters if you're impersonating the bad guys, it gets really, really tough. Which encounters can best be handled through impersonation, and which encounters is impersonation a really bad idea? That's for the party to discover by themselves. Fair warning, the module says it's for levels 5 to 7, but it's got a lot of extremely tough encounters for characters of that level, including 2 dragons. A lot of this is intentional because it's supposed to be a stealth adventure. You're supposed to sneak your way past everything to get to the main bad guy, but some of these encounters can easily turn into violence, and then good chance you'll get slaughtered. So it takes a really good DM to balance the extremely powerful stuff versus the need to not be in combat because it will be slaughtered. So if the party somehow manages to blow its cover, even by just a one bad roll, they don't automatically TPK. Once you actually get to the town that you're sneaking to, then you've got to go into spy mode because you've got a passphrase and you've got to find out the secret agent that will get you to the Shadow Lord's domain. Bear in mind, you're probably in disguise as soldiers for the bad guys by this point, and you don't know who's who, and most of the people in this town are evil, so there's a very good chance that you could even create even more fights. And the bad guys in this module are not stupid, so if you start just being obvious, you'll bring down the wrath of the army on you. And you have run a gauntlet by this point, so this is a time for the party to rest and relax, because actually getting to this town, you're having to go through a lot of encounters and being attacked by a lot of different stuff, so this is your rest time. So you figure out where the evil big bad is, and he is a stereotypical evil big bad. I mean, you might as well dress him up like Snidely Whiplash or Dick Dastardly, he's so evil. So you go off, you go through his army camp, you get to his evil castle, and then it's even more stealth mode because you are severely outmatched in this place. If you can convert this to the rule cyclopedia with the skills system, by all means do so, because this module really needs some sort of way to test for stealth. A lot of adventures you're trying to sneak past, or you are trying to fast talk your way through things, and you're going to need some skill checks, a lot in this one. Of course, this module was written 5 years before the rule cyclopedia, so you're going to have to do all the conversions yourself. Then, after you go through the castle and explore everything, you come across the evil big bad, and if you are very stealthy, which is no small task, you can actually catch him by surprise with him and his evil lieutenants and get a advantage on him. Otherwise, you're going to not catch him by surprise, and he will be waiting for you, and it's going to be a really, really tough fight until somebody realizes that, hey, we're here for the MacGuffin. We might want to go get the MacGuffin off the stand and use the MacGuffin against the bad guy, in which case the fight gets much easier. So that's the first module. You go to the kingdom, you run the gauntlet, you sneak around the camp till you find out where you're supposed to go, then you stealth through the castle, fight the bad guy, and congratulations, the fight's over. You give back the MacGuffin, you get a pat on the head, everybody loves you, and you go off being adventurers again. The end. Until you come to part 2, which can happen anytime later. Though not too much later, because the second part's actually a little bit easier than the first part, so if you level up a few times, the second part's actually going to be a walkthrough. The second part, apparently the Shadow Lord has now become the Wraith Lord because he succumbed to his injuries and became an undead creature, and now he's trying to turn all of the evil bad guy lands from both nations, both the humanoid Dinagoth and the human Asuria, into undead places, and you have to stop him. So this time you start off at a sage who tells you to kill the Wraith Lord. You've got to get the MacGuffin of bad guy slaying, which you immediately make a beeline for the black stick. Once you've got this, you trottle off to the evil bad guy's dungeon, where then you proceed to kill everyone, take the treasure, go to the next room, kill them, take their treasure, until you get to the bad guy, where then you use the MacGuffin to kill him, and that's it. That's the module. It's not exactly a very in-depth module. This is the module you throw at the party if you have zero prep time and you really don't want to think about some sort of mystery adventure, because this is not one of those. The second module barely ties into the first because it's just the Wraith Lord that you have to go find, and you have to go from A to B to C, and he's going to be waiting at C, so you just go from A, which gives you the thing to kill him, B is the path to him, and C is where you kill him, and that's the module. You kill all the minions, you get a bunch of weapons +1, you get some new spells, and that's it. Saga of the Shadow Lord promises us 3 new settings, but it doesn't give any detail on really any of them. Windar was this happy, perfect, snowy elfland before they lost their MacGuffin, and when you get it back, it goes back to being the happy, perfect, snowy elfland with the MacGuffin. Dinagoth is this 6,000-foot high plateau where all the evil creatures live, sitting around going to their evil jobs, eating evil food, watching evil TV shows, plotting evil invasions, and that's pretty much it. There's no characterization of the land at all. We know the orcs live there, we know gnolls live there, we know it's really high up, and other than that, it's just a generic, evil, bad guy land. It's like if Denver and Mordor were the same place. Then you go to Asuria, which was the original kingdom of the Shadow Lord, and it's just this place where all these barbarians are running around being anarchists because it was this glorious kingdom until he ruined it, and now there's no civilization left. Everybody runs around doing their own thing, but the module doesn't really describe what that thing is. Actually, the module really only discusses the Third Kingdom in passing. That's the biggest kick in the pants, is these are expert level modules, and they're late expert level modules. So we've got all these great modules beforehand as examples of how you should write an expert level module. And then you get 2 stock, run the gauntlet through the wilderness until you get to the dungeon, then kill the bad guy adventures. Yes, the first adventure is better because it makes it have a stealth element, which at least changes up the narrative a bit for the second one. But the second module is just 100% dungeon crawl, hack and slash, and that's it. The Expert series gave us Castle Amber and Isle of Dread and Red Arrow Black Shield and several other modules which stand out, and this one does not do its predecessors justice. If you want to grab this one, you can find it on eBay or Amazon for about $75. If you're patient, you'll find somebody who will actually put it up for auction, and then you can get it for around for $40 or $50. Drive-Thru RPG has the PDF for about $5. They say it's actually $10, but it's on sale. But Drive-Thru RPG always has a actual price that they never actually sell it for. If you want to actually adventure in Windar and Dinagoth and Asuria, go over to the Vaults of Pandius, because you've got guys that have made in complete gazetteers for all 3 of the nations mentioned in this module, and some of them are actually pretty well written. This is a short review because there's not really much to this module to review without giving away a point-by-point, room-by-room walkthrough, which is not what I want to do. Saga of the Shadow Lord is filled with modules that are considered all-time classics, and rightfully so. But unfortunately, it's got a lot of duds as well, and this is one of the duds. If you want something for your party to get through levels 5 through 7, go play Isle of Dread, go play Castle Amber, go play something else. The first part of this module is okay enough. It might get you up a level. You might like the stealth aspects of the modules. The second one is just a 100% generic dungeon crawl, which doesn't do the setting justice. So that's going to wrap up Saga of the Shadow Lord. I'm not going to waste any more time talking about a module that I wasn't impressed with. Welcome to Mystara for the newest remaster. We're stepping through the looking glass for a glance into Skarda's mirror. This remaster was a long time coming, as this was the video that inspired me to redo all my earlier videos. A storm had knocked out my internet for several days, and to keep up my schedule, I just did the review in one take on my phone, in portrait mode. Not my best effort. But now Module X12 gets a proper review, with moving pictures, extra sarcasm, and Winona. I'm Mr. Welch, and today we're getting back 7 years of bad luck. Skarda's Mirror was released in 1987 by TSR and was written by the guy who appeared first in every company directory, Aaron Alston. Tim Hildebrandt did the famous cover, and Alan Williamson and Jeff Easley handled the interior art. A strange quirk is the original book was done on magazine-grade paper rather than book paper. I don't know if it was that way for all printings, but every copy I've ever owned had the higher quality paper. I don't understand why they did it this way, but that's just a little bit of trivia. I should give a spoiler warning, but this module is over 30 years old, so no spoiler tags. If you want to play in the module, turn away now. The module expands Karamikos, gives the party some face time with Duke Stefan, and introduces the Ducal Hunting Lodge, which never appears again. This is where important people go to escape their courtly duties. It steps back from the previous 2 world-spanning modules and is more of a self-contained episode compared to other X-series modules. And I don't mean that as a pun. Even after taking out the eponymous mirror, the adventure is still contained entirely in Karamikos. There is very little travel involved. Okay, there is, but you're stuck in a pocket dimension for the bulk of the traveling. The intro to the adventure is a long-winded setup for a dungeon crawl. DMs, practice your diction in advance because you will be talking for a while. The box text on the first pages of the adventure is a full page that spills over into half of the next page. The party is chilling at a bar when they get approached by a couple, Taranon and Andrea. He's a veteran adventurer whose equally veteran adventurer's son has gone missing. She's a young wizard's apprentice and one of the few survivors of a mirror fiend that apparently wiped out almost everyone in Verge Manor. The party gets hired to clear out the tower. It's a simple dungeon crawl, at least to start with. A long block of text also explains the core concept of the adventure. Skarda is a very bad man with a small army of brigands that somehow kidnaps entire villages. Terranon's son, Redemaron, figured out who Skarda was and drove him off, capturing his Mirror of Life trapping. Redemaron kept it in his house for 2 years until the Mirror Fiend appeared one night, and Redemaron mysteriously vanished. Lady Halia, Redemaron's wife and co-ruler of Verge, showed up with her apprentices and guards to free Redemaron from the mirror. Only all hell broke loose, and everyone was killed or sucked into the mirror. Except for Andrea, because who would be able to explain the adventure if she didn't? The dungeon crawl is meant to be a tense affair. This monster tore apart 30 people and got the better of 2 high-level adventurers. There are jump scares and monsters that seem out of place. They escape from the wizard's lab. There's little treasure, but the key point is to emphasize how empty the place is. The monster they are hunting for is still there, but it's waiting to ambush them. The party is going to find evidence of a major slobber knocker on every floor. DMs, you're going to need to point out that there's blood everywhere, but there's no body. There's also no treasure to be found, which is unusual considering the lord and lady are high-level adventurers. But somebody has looted the tower of everything of value. More importantly, there's no mirror. There are pieces of broken mirrors everywhere, but they aren't going to find Skarda's mirror in the tower. If the party tries to reassemble the broken mirror pieces, they're going to find out that they have more pieces than would actually fit in the broken mirror frame. The party is now being hunted by Skarda. The plot-mandated ambush won't happen until the party has let its guard down. Run another adventure or 2 to get the players' minds off the missing mirror and the evil wizard. When the ambush goes down, it's relatively brief. Skarda teleports in front of the characters, probably while they're sleeping in a tavern or just walking down the street. He's got the mirror out in full display, and he calls everybody's attention to it. He doesn't care about collateral damage, more slaves for him if he snags some bystanders. The characters do get a saving throw, but the ones that pass get immediately mobbed by a large number of thugs that pour from the mirror to engage them. The players will more than likely kill a few of the thugs, but Skarda has hundreds of men at his disposal. The party is going into the mirror, so if you've got players that don't like negative things to happen to their players, this is where they're going to raise a stink. But no mirror, no adventure. Laugh at their cries of unfairness. The party will quickly figure out that the mirror is more than it seems. If the small army that just streamed out of it wasn't a big enough clue, if any of them tries to break the mirror, the weapon or spell they throw at the mirror will either bounce off or pass through. Your discretion. Their next clue is when they find themselves on a platform in the middle of the set of Tron, the 1982 version, not the recent quasi-remake that had all the same action scenes. Stark angles, a giant ziggurat, and everything is mirrored. Think Alan Parsons from the New World album cover. They are surrounded by lots of guards, and invisibility doesn't work here. They can try to get away, and the module does account for that option, but more than likely, everybody's captured. They finally meet Skarda for the first time, who's quite jovial and happy to see them. He tells them that they are his slaves, and it's nothing personal, but at least he's polite about it. The module even says he looks like a favorite uncle rather than an evil wizard. If somebody did get away, he will have his guards track down the errant character. He does know how many people got pulled through the mirror, and he can count. He does that whole "you have failed me for the last time" shtick on his officer if one of the party did get away. He's equal parts Dr. Evil and Ramsay Bolton. The party has found itself in a pocket dimension held inside the mirror. It was created by an immortal of thought who used it for his own personal getaway. The entire dimension is about a mile long and 3/4 of a mile wide with a ceiling of 500 feet. A continual light effect from above lights the entire dimension, and everything inside is constructed from a black rock-like material with a mirror's reflection. If you carve out part of the ground or the walls, every new exposed face will also have a mirrored reflection. The party gets locked up in a rather secure prison, but can still get an exposition dump from the prisoner in the cell next to them, which is about another page of box text to read. They found out that Skarda has been kidnapping entire homesteads for decades, and he's building an army to take out the Duke. This isn't new information. The original info dump mentioned that plan earlier, but this confirms it. The party then has to escape, and most of the old jailbreak tricks work. Thieves can pick the locks, you can taunt the guards until they get within arm's reach, or a fighter can pull the chains out of the wall. It's essential the party escapes, so any decent plan should work. If they are plagued by bad luck in all their plans, their neighbor has an ally that will spring them. Then you've got another dungeon crawl, only one where you don't have any weapons or spells and have to take out the guards without raising the alarm. You can try to find Redemaron and Halia, or escape and link up with the resistance groups outside the ziggurat. Of course, the party will want their stuff back because they will be a minimum of 5th level, and they should have a small arsenal. And before the party gets any ideas, both Redemaron and Halia have their names engraved on their stuff, which is sad because they have some really awesome stuff. The party will escape to the slaves' quarters, which is known by everybody in the dimension as just hell. The party will discover that the population of the mirror is in the thousands, and many of them have been here for decades. There's about 100 rebels, but there are 3,000 slaves that the party will need to try and rescue from Skarda. They will also learn that the dimension is starting to become unstable. If the earthquakes they constantly experienced didn't give that away, their jailbreak buddy will mention how Skarda's tampering has damaged the dimension. He will then defer to the party's leadership. Redemaron and Halia can be of some help, but they've been worked over and need healing before they can lend a hand. There are many ways for the party to start the revolt, from open violence to stealth and guile. Remember, Skarda has hundreds of trained men versus 100 half-starved slaves with crude weapons. If the players do instigate a full-on slave revolt, they will drag down many of the slavers with sheer numbers, but the butcher's bill will be substantial. Eventually, the party will get to one of the portals that Skarda has been sending his men through, and that's when the final act starts. The party finds itself in the Ducal Hunting Lodge, miles from the palace. The Duke came here for a respite, meaning his family isn't with him. Skarda knows he's in trouble when the party emerges from the mirror, but promptly teleports away, while the party and their allies deal with the slavers. And there's a lot of them. They will be fighting Skarda's men almost every step of the way. Redemaron and Halia, along with other allies, quickly get separated in the fighting, and the party must find the Duke on their own. The Ducal Guard is here in small numbers, and they are holding their own. Just hope the party isn't wearing Skarda uniforms. The party gets to play the big damn heroes and rescue the Duke from half a dozen elite guards, then fight back-to-back with him in the final showdown with Skarda. The villain shows up with his men, the surviving Ducal Guard arrives, led by Redemaron and Halia, and it's a massive scrum in the Ducal Ballroom. Once that's over, Skarda is dead or defeated. The parties get to watch the mirror succumb to the internal stresses and shatters. This causes it to spew out everyone and everything that was trapped inside. And that's over 3,000 people. Then the Duke gives the characters a big party, rewards them, and sets them up to become lords and ladies when they hit name level. The end. But that leads to the biggest plot hole in the adventure, Skarda's master plan. The mirror is an artifact that causes its owner to try and take over the world. Skarda is going to try this with 300 men. Skarda is planning on taking over Keramikos with an army about a tenth of the size of Duke Stefan's. He plans to kidnap world leaders one by one until every nation surrenders to him. But he doesn't have the manpower to enforce this. Duchess Olivia will unleash the wrath of everyone she has in Keramikos to get the Duke back. Pulling a bunch of pissed-off armed elven soldiers into your mirror dimension will just get your people killed. Then there's Emperor Thincall, who will want to know what happened to his friend, and he will send over an entire legion to investigate. A legion of 15,000 men, or a force 50 times larger than Skarda's meager army. And that's the first of 30 legions Thincall can send. Not to mention trying to kidnap a level 36 former gladiator does not end well. Now, Skarda is compelled by the artifact to try and conquer the world, so he's probably not thinking clearly. That might actually serve in his defense if there is a trial. That's Skarda's Mirror. It's a short module, especially for expert level. It's also a step backwards in terms of level because it's only for levels 5 to 8 compared to Red Arrow Black Shield, just a few modules previously. Despite being so late in the release run, it's also one of the lower expert level modules. You can get the reprint for about $10 or $5 if you just want the PDF. An original version will cost you $50 to $60 in decent shape. How badly do you want the pull-away cover with all the maps? Welcome back to Mystara, everybody, for the penultimate expert module to be covered, X13, the Crown of Ancient Glory. I'm Mr. Welch, and today we are talking about the last official expert module ever printed. The Crown of Ancient Glory was printed in '87 by Stephen Bourne, the second module ever set in the nation of Vestland after the Curse of Xanathon. The module, like the other later expert modules, turned away from the exploration focus of the X series for a more traditional style module. This review might run a bit short, as the module is a mystery requiring you to find the missing crown, the rightful king, and figure out the villains, so I can't give too much away. The module was written a year before the Northern Reaches Gazetteer, and it shows, as this module resembles nothing like it's the official version of the Vestland. Instead of Vikings and fjords, Vestland in the module resembles more Arthurian England. The names are more Gaelic, and the plot is almost straight out of Le Morte de Arthur. There are obvious allusions to Hugo's Man in the Iron Mask, and Bourne obviously read his classics before designing the module. The basic premise of the module is that King Mehrumet has died and his body is lost. The magical crown that gives the module its name is also lost, so Vestland has no way to determine who is the true king. Mehrumet's young son Thindal is named king, but does not have the full support of the nobility. Unfortunately, Thindal gets himself killed pretty quickly off screen, leaving the nation without a clear leader. That, of course, starts the module as the party is hired to find the lost crown so the nation can learn who is the rightful king. The Victor Hugo reference becomes obvious when the party discovers almost immediately Mehrumet had twin sons. He sent the second son off to avoid a crisis over the throne. So to discover the identity of the long-lost son, you've got to find the crown. The adventure is largely a wilderness module, but is a bit railroaded by the plot. There is a large dungeon crawl in the middle of the module with a bit of seaborne adventuring at the end. With each clue leading you to the next location, there's not a lot of room for exploration here. The module also has a large page count weighing in at 64 pages, but a dozen of those pages are for pre-generated characters and maps. Adding to this, there's a lot of exposition at the beginning of the module. 2 pages devoted to the setup of the story, and the guy giving the party the quest rambles on for almost a full page. So if you're the DM, you make sure you have a water bottle, as there's going to be a lot of talking before the party even gets started. Not on par with Ayn Rand levels of verbosity, but you're still running your bone box for several minutes. The module has a large amount of mystery and investigation. I've probably said this almost every module, but the skill system from the rule cyclopedia greatly increases the playability of the module. You're going to be searching, interrogating, and researching for a lot of this adventure. There is a conspiracy and work against the parties, and cleaving your way through everybody you encounter isn't going to stop it. The module will tend to bore people looking for hack and slash. It's more of a scavenger hunt than your typical Viking epic, though the ending of the module is pretty much waves of bad guys throwing themselves at you, so if you really want to kill things, you just got to wait through the end of the module. The strength of the module is the writing. It's a well-written plot and a thought-out adventure. Yes, it's inspired by some literary classics, but a good plot is still a good plot no matter the setting. The locations you have to go around to figure out who the bad guys are, as well as find out who the king is, are rather unique, which does give the module its Arthurian feel. With misty moors, isolated islands filled with berserkers, and a stealth run through an evil noble's castle, while the game's still largely a railroad adventure, at least it's a scenic trip. Unfortunately for the setting in Mystara, the module hasn't aged well, largely because the gazetteer that followed, describing Vestland, turned the nation into something more akin to Sweden than North York. So to make it fit into the Vestland of the Northern Reaches gazetteers, you've got some work to do. The Ethengar are still presented as the evil, yet curiously undescribed barbarians at the gate, not as quasi-Mongolians from their gazetteer. But you can usually change or omit them entirely because they're not in the modules, they're just threatened by random passing NPCs. You don't have to change much of the module with the mechanics, save for updating it to the rules cyclopedia, but if you play anywhere near the Northern Reaches, you're going to have to change a lot of the names because Gil Erid and King Tinatar don't have much of a Viking feel. At the very least, set the modules a few years before the Vestland timeline, or just either have this happen previously, or even better, use this to explain the coronation of the current Vestland king. The best way to keep the module canon without disturbing the timeline is just move it to the Isle of Dawn. Crown of Ancient Glory is filled with the imagery and locations that are taken almost directly from English myth. Adding to this is that parts of the island are settled by several Northmen, so there's still a Viking-like presence in several parts of the island. You just have to change Ethengar to the Alphatians and slightly modify the Big Bad's plans, but it fits perfectly into the setting. A large part of the map mentioned in the module doesn't mesh with the Vestland map from other sources anyways, so putting it into the Isle of Dawn rather, just requires you to find a region with some cities that are somewhat the same distance as the cities in the module. Failing that, just invent some small towns around the capital of and wing it. West Rourke, Redstone, and Caerdania have a very strong Saxon, Irish, and Welsh influence, respectively. A large portion of the northern half of the Isle of Dawn is filled up with cities with obvious Viking and Norse-sounding names, so you can just shoehorn in the Viking names that you're going to find in the module by just putting it fairly north onto the isle itself. Now, if you don't care about canon, or this is just a one-off, don't worry about all this, but if you want to actually have a world-building Mystara game and have this part of your background and your canon, you just got a little bit of work to do, but not too bad. Converting the module to 5th edition is a little bit more difficult because of the nautical part at the end. The module has a rather fierce ship battle where the big bad sends a ship of mooks to stop the party from getting the new king back to the palace, and ship-to-ship combat is something that BEMCI put a lot of focus on, but you'll need to wing it or grab some source books from the DM's Guild to help you with the rather large-scale battle that caps the module off. The villain is sending everyone he's got, but you have quite a few allies, so the final scrap can reach almost mass combat levels, something, again, that 5th edition is really lacking on. So narrate the mook-on-mook action, or just scale it down to manageable levels, but you really want to have a blowout of a battle at the end, because this is the king that you're bringing forward, and you've discovered who the evil villain is, and he's got a lot of influence, and he's going to try to stop you. And since the module has been pretty combat light, you really want to send your players out with something they will remember. And longboats crashing into each other with dozens of Vikings storming over the railings to get to the king, and you and your ship's crew has to hold them off, if done right, is going to be one of the most memorable fights your players are ever going to have. So you got to really spruce this one up. Just let go in this battle. You've had a very low-key adventure until now. You've been sneaking around, looking for clues, and solving riddles until now, and suddenly a boatload of bad guys shows up and is trying to keep you from getting to the king from an awesome moment of crowning, so just have at it. Set things on fire, throw berserkers at them, hell, put one of them on fire, then throw them at him. By this time, the module is 95% done, and an epic battle at the end is always more dramatic than just throwing the newly appointed king over to the region and saying, here's the guy you've been looking for, where's our money? So acquiring the module is not cheap. I have seen it go for as little as $40 on auction. Most people want about twice that when they sell it. This is about the same price for the rest of the later expert level modules, so apparently they didn't print as much as they did, say, Isle of Dread or Castle Amber. I would say the size of the module might affect the price, but there's a lot of other later modules in addition to this one that are half the size and still about the same price. There's no extra pieces like there was in Red Arrow Black Shield, so if you're buying the module, all you have to do is check it for quality to make sure the pages aren't falling out, there's no marks in it. And you're going to have to buy it second market. It's not available on print on demand yet. If you want to buy the PDF, that's $5 on Drive-Thru RPG, then you can go down and print it out yourself. Though, remember, this has got a large page count, so you're going to be printing for a while. So that wraps up Crown of Ancient Glory. I didn't go into the module that much in detail because it is a mystery, and it's a decent mystery. You're buying this one for the storyline, not for the exploration, because there is none for that other than just where the railroad takes you. This was the last module in the Expert series, and the initial parts of the Expert series were all about exploration. They had so many different sandbox modules. Even though Isle of Dread was the best one, it still gave you Quagmire and Savage Coast, even though those two were generally considered subpar, including by myself. But the Crown of Ancient Glory is a module that does overcome the railroading that was endemic with the later Expert modules. It has a great plot, and it's got a thrilling end that you run the gauntlet of everything the secret big bad can actually throw at you. It's a mystery module with some action, and you just can't kill your way to the big bad. The first part of the module requires investigation. The second part is a stealth run, and don't worry if you want to stab things. The third part will fill that up for you. Because this week, for the 50th episode of Welcome to Mystara, we're going to talk about arguably the worst module in the BEMCI line, if not the entire D&D series, XL1, Quest for the Heartstone. This is a tie-in module for the LJN toy line, and it shows. You're going to hear the phrase, "You may use this dragon monster produced by LJN Toys Limited for this encounter," more than once in this review. Written in 1984 by Michael L. Gray, who was best known for giving us Fortress America, Shogun, and most importantly, Dream Phone. He was also the guy at TSR that hired Tracy Hickman, so he's indirectly responsible for Ravenloft and Dragonlance. So with that long and storied list of successes, he was allowed one misfire. And Heartstone was that misfire. The module repeatedly asks you to use the toy line as miniatures while you play, and Remember, these toys are about the size of He-Man, the old, cool, beefy burrito of manlyhood He-Man, not these skinny, girly new He-Man models. The module was written for levels 5 to 10, so if you want to use your own characters, you could, but you would be cheating yourself of the ultimate joy of the module, as the entire toy line is statted out for you. I know this is the 1980s, so we remember some of the really weird tastes back then, but man, we also had some awesome toys. The D&D toys were no exception. They even had the Tarrasque as a wind-up toy. Tiamat was, and still is, the most desired of all the toys, though sadly most of the toy you can find nowadays are broken. All the action figures are present in this module. After reading their names off, it sounds like they were named by Jack Chick. You can play the good guys: Strongheart, the lawful paladin; Elkhorn, the dwarven mercenary; Mercion, the cleric; Ringelrun, Elfstar, Perale, Figgin, Molivar, Hockler, the ranger; Deeth, Beaumark, the other ranger; and Valkyr, the barbarian. If you want to be the bad guys, pick from Grimsword, the evil fighter; Zargosh, Kellic, the always popular war duke; Scylla, Zorgar, Blackleaf, Drex, and Zarek. And if you didn't notice, I snuck in Elfstar and Blackleaf from the Dark Dungeons Chick track. It's okay, because those names were just as cliche as the toys. So go ahead and grab some pre-generated characters and get ready to adventure. They even mix and match the characters in the rather good Jeff Easley artwork. There's Warduke listening to the pitch while he works with the good guys as if it were a day job. Only he's the guy that eats other people's food from the fridge, so if your chicken salad goes missing, it's the guy with the cool helmet. So don't be Warduke, guys, even if he does have a cool hat. So you pick your character, get your corresponding 5-inch action figure, and get ready to play. The action opens up with a lot of expository dialogue. In the magical land of Gyr, everyone was happy and joyous because good King Ganto kept the peace and the nation prospered. He married the much younger and attractive Queen Lyra and promptly snuffs it, because that's how marriages with 50-year-old age differences tend to end. So now Lyra has to get a new husband that requires the Heartstone to tell her who to marry, because she's so lawful good she just can't find a guy, declare him king, and just lie to the people about what the Heartstone said. So she calls together all the great heroes of the realm to find the Heartstone so she can just get a little. Cue a quarter-page of expository dialogue. To skip a bit, you go to the Mountains of Ice, where the evil Danacris the Master Thief stole the crown 50 years ago. Seriously, they know where he is and don't do anything about it for half a century. Thus begins one of the most railroadiest railroads ever written. You will march through the mist of the northern marsh, where you will be attacked constantly by a lot of monsters from the toy line, including troglodytes, hobgoblins, and the terrible troll action figure, until you come to the perils of Icewater Falls, where the first railroad ends and the second one begins. There you will be attacked by giants, salamanders, a dragon, and of course dragons. You may use the Dragon monster produced by LGN Toys Limited for this encounter. After that encounter, you get to the end where you are attacked by, of course, the Carrion Crawlers. You may use the Carrion Crawler monster produced by LGN Toys Limited for this encounter. Finally, you find the Mountain of Ice after you've encountered every single monster in the order presented. It's just one combat encounter after another, wash, rinse, and repeat. In the module's defense, it's obviously they're showing off the toy line, so if you're expecting anything else, you're gonna have a bad time. So you get to the dreaded mountains, and inside you go, where you are immediately put on another railroad, so strap in, hold on, and enjoy the ride. There are a ton of traps, spooky encounters, and plenty of hook horrors everywhere. You may use the hook horror monster produced by LGN Toys Limited for this encounter. Again, this is room-to-room dungeon crawling and keeping the treasures as you go. So there's not much of a plot in the module, you just keep killing things until you get to the villain, then you find the MacGuffin. The monsters are obviously thrown in because they're in the toy line. Walk into a cave, you get attacked by a Hydra. Of course, the next line after the Hydra is, you may use the 5-headed Hydra bendable monster produced by TSR Incorporated for this encounter. It's fairly obvious as the monsters don't even have a reason why they're there. There's no rhyme or reason how they got there or what they're doing. This is not Elminster's ecology. There's a lot of traps, and most of the traps are the sending you into a room with a monster variety. They really want you to fight all these monsters with the characters provided. The funny part is that the characters aren't even in the least bit balanced. If you want to play an evil fighter, Warduke, evil fighter, is a solid level 8, where Zargar, evil barbarian, is sneaking in at a paltry level 5. Drex, evil warrior, splits the difference slightly at level 6, but people are still going to want to play Warduke. I mean, seriously, look at that helmet. Why would you not want to play him? The good guys are even stranger. You can play Strongheart, good paladin, who comes in at level 10, which is awesome until you notice that he put his 17 in charisma, leaving his strength at 13. The rest of the fighter types come nowhere near level 10, except for Perale, fighter mage elf, who is also level 10. And for those keeping track at home, a 10th level elf in BEMCI needs 600,000 XP, where a 10th level fighter like Strongheart, good paladin, only needs 36,000 XP. Bolivar, Lawful Thief, to compare, is only level 8, requiring 60,000 XP. So that elf has twice the experience points as the most powerful character that's next in line, and 10 times that of the lower tier pre-generated characters. Balance is not an important focus in this book. The module is what you would expect to see watching Stranger Things, because the party is walking along and suddenly the DM slams the next monster they see on the table, screaming, "Now you face the raging roper," and then you roll for initiative. That's the complexity of the module. It's just one encounter after another. You want to fight all the monsters in the monster manual in a single sitting? This is the module you want. There's very little dialogue. It's the most hack and slash module probably ever written. The module throws every toy they ever made at you. You're going to be attacked by dragons 3 times in this module with no apparent reason. Most of the monsters you're going to come across existed as the toy during the 80s, with the exception of the gray ooze that you're going to be encountering quite a lot. So for that, just use gravy from the mashed potatoes. The funny part is that these action figures are 5 inches tall, which is several times more than your typical miniature. So you're going to have to increase all the maps and scenery by 3 to 5 times to compensate. You can see the problem suggesting that you use action figures instead of the normal Ralpartha miniatures of the day. So they did miss a wonderful opportunity by not having a tie-in with the cartoon that came out a year prior to this module. So, because who doesn't want to play Hank or Sheila, Bobby, Diana, Presto, or Eric? Okay, maybe not Eric, because even though while he complained the most, he was often right about his complaints and still nobody listened to him. I said that this was one of the worst BEMCI modules ever written, and the initial reviews reflected that. It really doesn't add anything new. It's there to promote toy lines, and it's obvious. Much like White Plume Mountain, it's really on a rail, so you can take one fork or another to get to the bad guy, but all paths lead to the same place. There's not much dialogue, you can't get lost, and you're going to have to fight everything. A lot of people have a soft spot in their hearts for this module because of its cheese factor, and there's a lot of cheese in the module. The name of half the characters alone sound like extras from Masters of the Universe. So much of the module seems to be written on a dartboard. You've got 20 pre-generated characters in a module calling for 8 players. Kellic, the evil wizard, has a strength score equal to or greater than 8 of the 10 fighters presented. Elkhorn, good dwarf warrior, has a strength score of 9. Try to have a fighter with a strength of 9 today. Zarek, evil half-orc assassin, in a game with no half-orcs, has a dex of 12 and a wisdom of 15. Half of the module seems like it was written using Mad Libs. All that being said, Jeff Easley's art in this module is top-notch. While the writing was somewhat slapdash, the art was some of the best Easley has ever done. There's a good chance that he already had this art waiting for a module to put it in, and this is the one they used. There's a picture of a chimera flying over a hydra swimming in the ocean, and what looks like a beholder behind them, even though there isn't a beholder-style monster in the module. Hydras and chimeras you get in abundance, just no beholders of any kind. Guess which one they didn't make a toy for. The art is some of the best in any module. Even the toy characters drawn as D&D characters is superb. Now there's a chance he also didn't like working on the module, but that's just a hunch. So if you're looking to grab this module, you are in luck. The module is dirt cheap compared to so many more. You can find good copies on eBay for only $20, and there are a lot to choose from. If you have to be cheap, you can get the PDF for $5 online, but why be cheap? Paper is so much better, and you get the hard cardboard map as a screen, so you don't have to map anything out. Spend the $20, buy the hard copy, don't be cheap. It's already cheap enough as it is, and considering the last few modules I've reviewed have been closer to a C-note each, it's refreshing to find something inexpensive. If you want to convert this to 5th edition, just plug and play. Just take the monster out from the BEMCI, put in the monster from the 5th edition. This module is in no way concerned about balance. Open one door and you're attacked by 5 hydras. A few doors down, it's 24 sturges. You'll have to create the monsters not in 5th edition. There are quite a few in the module, especially the dragons. Somebody had a hard-on for dragons in this module because you run into them at least 3 times. You've got to convert several golems, including wood and bronze, as well as the spoiler alert famous mirror match where you fight your evil or good clones, which makes me wonder, if you're doing this party recommended, why not just take out Warduke when he's facing his good clone, and then you have good Warduke in the party now. Also, convert the pre-gens to 5th edition, which you just absolutely should do, because you need to keep Kellic at 15 strength, so when the party goes to recruit him so they can go on this quest, they find him lifting weights and reading over his spell book at the same time. This guy is the original muscle mage. Bonus points if you replace all the models for He-Man scale toys just for this module alone. So that's Quest for the Heartstone. It's goofy, it's extremely linear, and it's the plot is almost tacked on. Lyra, that's a queen's name, Lyra. The characters provided have stats generated from just guessing what the toy had. It's begged to be played on silly mode. If you're looking for an intriguing module with a gripping storyline, this ain't it. If you want to take a rocket ride through the nostalgic 80s, then slap down the $20 and get started. Play up the cheese factor. Remember the pre-gens aren't even remotely close to being balanced. The more this resembles an 80s Saturday morning cartoon, the better. If you're mixing good and evil characters, remember that evil has to be petty. So all of Strongheart's rations are going to have bites taken out of them, and Warduke's not going to know anything about that. So this wraps up all the X modules.